Well, this is GB News live and continuing coverage of that horrific attack on Bondi Beach in Sydney, Australia, now confirmed to have been a terrorist attack. We've just been listening to a news conference conducted by the New South Wales Premier, Chris Minns, and the New South Wales Police Commissioner, Mal Lanyon, and some significant new information coming out of that news conference. Confirmation, of course, that the number of people who have died has now risen to 12. That number, they warn, could rise further. There are 29 other people who have been injured and taken to area hospitals. All of the injured have been described as being in a serious condition with various degrees of serious injury. They would not go into the exact details of the injuries or indeed the age range of those who have been taken to hospital, except to confirm some reports that a child may have been among those shot, and 2 police officers certainly among those shot, according to the police commissioner. That very significant confirmation as well that this has now been designated a terrorist attack. The police commissioner said the reason that he had concluded that this was a terrorist attack was because of the fact, of course, that Hanukkah celebration was taking place with some 2,000 attendees there on Bondi Beach, but also through information gleaned from at least one of the suspects who have, in the words of the police, been neutralised, one in a critical condition. One of those shooting suspects has been shot dead. And according to the police commissioner, information gleaned from one of those suspected attackers has helped lead him to the conclusion of a terrorist attack. To me, that speaks of an individual that was known to the authorities, may have been on a terror watch list. As the commissioner said, though, it doesn't signify, though, at this stage that they have missed intelligence opportunities that were out there. That kind of information will come out in the fullness of time. The commissioner said that they responded to multiple calls of shootings at this area of Bondi Beach at 6:47 Australia in local time in Sydney this evening, with, of course, multiple victims at the scene, dealt and neutralised 2 suspected attackers. But the commissioner also cautioning that it is possible there may be a 3rd attacker still unaccounted for. Out of an abundance of caution, they are continuing their inquiries to determine whether or not there is a 3rd suspect. But the scene is being secured at the moment because, again, confirmation from the commissioner there that an improvised explosive device, or at least a suspected improvised explosive device, has been found in a vehicle parked nearby. That vehicle and IED, according to the commissioner, has been linked to one of the suspects. Bomb disposal teams are at the scene now, trying to deal with that suspected device. And we heard from the New South Wales Premier saying that this was an attack that was designed to target the Jewish community, a horrifying and evil attack. Mr. Minns described this as. He called for an outpouring of love and support for our Jewish community across Australia. And just finally wrapping up from this news conference, the Commissioner in New South Wales pleading with the community to stay calm despite the horrific nature of what has unfolded here on Bondi Beach, just imploring them not to take to the streets to stay calm. And we're joined at this hour now by Michael Portillo.
Thank you very much. You were hearing there the voice of Mark White, who is our Home and Security Editor here on GB News. Thank you, Mark. In case you're just joining us, there has been an anti-Jewish terror attack in Bondi Beach in Sydney, which has resulted in the death of at least 11 members of the public. One of the gunmen is dead, the other is in a critical condition. There has just been a press conference by the Premier of New South Wales and the Commissioner of Police. And now another press conference is taking place in Canberra with the Premier of Australia, Anthony Albanese, speaking.
By Nigel Ryan, the Acting Deputy Commissioner for National Security for the AFP, and Mike Burgess, the Director General of ASIO. And we don't normally talk at confirmed meetings of the National Security Committee, but I think at this moment it is appropriate to tell Australians that the National Security Committee was convened as a matter of urgency, and we have just come from it. This afternoon, there has been a devastating terrorist incident at Bondi at the Hanukkah by the Sea celebration. There's a targeted attack on Jewish Australians on the first day of Hanukkah, which should be a day of joy, a celebration of faith. An act of evil anti-Semitism, terrorism, that has struck the heart of our nation. An attack on Jewish Australians is an attack on every Australian, and every Australian tonight will be, like me, devastated on this attack on our way of life. There is no place for this hate, violence and terrorism in our nation. Let me be clear, we will eradicate it. Amidst this vile act of violence and hate will emerge a moment of national unity where Australians across the board will embrace their fellow Australians of Jewish faith at this dark moment for our nation. Our police and security agencies are working to determine anyone associated with this outrage. Our agencies will provide you with factual updates as quickly as possible as they continue to emerge. The evil that was unleashed at Bondi Beach today is beyond comprehension, and the trauma and loss that families are dealing with tonight is beyond anyone's worst nightmare. Australians have had their lives cruelly stolen and many have been injured. For all Australians, our first thoughts are with those in the terrible early hours of their grief. We are also thinking of everyone being treated for their injuries, and many of whom are alive right now because of the courage and quick action of the New South Wales Police and the first responders who rushed to their aid, as well as the courage of everyday Australians who, without hesitating, put themselves in danger in order to keep their fellow Australians safe. We have seen Australians today run towards danger in order to help others. These Australians are heroes, and their bravery has saved lives. As Prime Minister, I say on behalf of all Australians to the Jewish community, we stand with you, we embrace you, and we reaffirm tonight that you have every right to be proud of who you are and what you believe. You have the right to worship and study and live and work in peace and safety, and you enrich us as a nation. You should never have to endure the loss that you have suffered today. You should never know the fear that you know tonight. We will dedicate every resource required to making sure you are safe and protected. You are Australian, and all Australians are with you today and every day. My fellow Australians, I say tonight that there are nights that tear at our nation's soul. In this moment of darkness, we must be each other's light. Hold on to the true character of the country that we love. Australia is stronger than the cowards who attacked innocent people today. Australia is braver than those who seek to make us afraid. Australia will never submit to division, violence or hatred. We will see justice done. We will come through this together. I'd ask Acting Deputy Commissioner Ryan to make some comments, and then Director General Burgess.
Thank you, Prime Minister. Firstly, our thoughts go out to the families and communities that...
We were listening there to the Prime Minister of Australia, Anthony Albanese. There's been a meeting of the Australian National Security Committee attended by the Prime Minister. The Prime Minister described it as an act of evil anti-Semitism. He said that an attack on Jewish Australians is an attack on all Australians. He commended those Australians who were seen running towards danger, and he declared that they are heroes. Let's now speak to News Australia presenter Peter Credlin. Peter, can you hear me?
Yes, I can, Michael.
Peter, may I ask where you are? Are you in Sydney?
No, I'm in Melbourne. I'm in Victoria. I'm a Sky News host, but I formerly was the Chief of Staff to Prime Minister Tony Abbott. So I have to say, very, very sadly, very unfortunately, this is the sort of terror event that Australia hoped it would never see at this scale. And sadly, hate has come to our shores tonight.
Yes, I think it's particularly surprising to us. There was a terrible massacre at Port Arthur back in 1996, and following that, in an extraordinary display of cross-party action, in that same year, anti-gun legislation was passed. Many Australians were required to surrender their guns, and some of the strictest gun laws in the world were applied in Australia back in 1996. And I think I'm right in saying that although recently there have been a number of anti-Jewish incidents, Australia has not seen a massacre on anything like this scale for quite a long period. Does it therefore surprise you particularly to see another mass killing after that very progressive legislation was put in place?
I hate to say, no, it doesn't, in the sense that we've had rising anti-Semitism in Australia. I have a mosque in my a synagogue in my street that was firebombed. There was another one in Melbourne that was also firebombed a few suburbs away from me. There's been quite horrific attacks on Jewish homes in Sydney and elsewhere. So there has been, for 2.5 years, rising anti-Semitism in Australia. The sort of large-scale protests, pro-Palestinian protests that we've seen in Britain have been here, a feature of Australian cities for most weekends since October 7, 2 years ago. I think the issue for us, obviously, with very, very tight gun laws, we would not have expected to see this many dead, this many hospitalised, critically wounded, as we can see tonight. But we do have shootings in Australia, sadly. Guns do come in. They're not detected, and they do end up being used by criminals, but it is usually criminal to criminal violence. We've not seen anything like this since Port Arthur in Australia.
You were talking there about the number of anti-Jewish incidents that there have been, fire bombings at synagogues and so on, and you also talk about the demonstrations. How do you link those two phenomena? Do you think the two are linked?
The protests, the pro-Palestinian protests, which are
protests
basically
and the violence, yeah.
And they are thinly guised, Michael, as being for Palestine, pro-Gazan, but they are deeply, deeply anti-Semitic. They're anti-Zionist, they're anti-Jewish, they are full of hate, and they have changed the very nature of the Australian society in the last 2 years. It is beyond recognisable that this has unleashed a very ugly anti-Semitism in Australia of the like I never thought I would see in my lifetime.
And how have the governments of Australia and the government of Australia, how have they reacted to those demonstrations? This has clearly been a big issue for us in the United Kingdom.
It's been huge here too. I mean, you heard there the opening remarks from the Prime Minister. They are the strongest words to decry anti-Semitism that we have heard from him in 2.5 years, because he has not been strong on the issue of anti-Semitism at all. He received a report from his anti-Semitism envoy, his special envoy, about 5 months ago. It has sat on his desk. There has been no official response to nearly 30 recommendations. At the same time that he ordered the report into anti-Semitism with an action plan, he also asked for a report into Islamophobia. Now, Islamophobia in Australia is virtually non-existent, but it's the even-handedness, the Me Tooism that comes with this issue. And we've not had a response to either of those reports. So it has been a scourge in Australia in the last 2.5 years. In Melbourne, in my hometown of Melbourne, we have some of the highest representatives of Holocaust survivors in the world. You know, so many of them came and set up their lives in Australia. We have a proud Jewish history going back over 200 years. We've had governors general of Australia who have been proud Jewish Australians. Anti-Semitism was not a feature of our country until recent years.
I won't ask you, Peter, trying to recall the 30 recommendations, but what stands out in your mind? I mean, what might Australian governments have done over the last few months that they've not yet done, not yet reacted to?
There are a range of recommendations: increasing security for Jewish Australians, increasing hate speech laws. We have, and it is not yet clear, this has been declared a terrorist event. That's very clear tonight from the Prime Minister and the Premier of New South Wales. There is no link yet with Islamist groups or anything like that. But I will say there has not been enough to deal with hate speech in Australia directed at Jewish Australians. We have not deported anybody who speaks vile hatred from mosques on Friday afternoons at prayers. We've not done anything much to deal with radicalised young people. In Australia, we have just returned a cohort of ISIS brides out of camps in Syria. That was done in secret. That has now been revealed to the Australian public. About 2 months ago, they arrived back in Australia, and that has caused enormous community anger. Australia has taken over 3,000 people from Gaza. In per capita terms, Michael, that is a huge cohort to come to this country. We do not have a post anywhere near Gaza. So the capacity of Australian officials to security vet these people is virtually non-existent. They're not being taken in by their Muslim neighbours in the region. They have come to Australia, and that's also been very badly received by the community. As I said, we do not know that this is an Islamist attack, but it's very clearly a terror attack directed at Jewish Australians. That's been confirmed by officials.
Peter Credlin, thank you very much indeed for joining us from Melbourne. Our condolences to the Australian people on this dreadful evening in Australia. Peter Credlin is the Sky News Australia presenter. Let's now speak to journalist and Israeli affairs expert Asher Westrop Evans. Asher, are you on the line there?
Yeah, certainly am.
Asher, tell me what your reaction has been to the attack, this anti-Jewish terror attack that has occurred on Bondi Beach, and to the reaction of the Australian Premier Anthony Albanese.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, this attack here, I'm speaking to you from Tel Aviv as people are preparing today for Hanukkah events to start this evening. It's a joyous time, supposed to be for Jews around the world, a time of unity, a time of togetherness. And to have this news break in the sort of early mid-morning here was just absolutely shocking and frankly appalling. I mean, really, we've seen the escalating developments over the course of the last sort of year or two in Australia, with the uptick in those extreme anti-Semitism incidents, the firebombing attacks, threats of bombs and other varied arson attacks across Australia. And we've been watching here. I myself, as a native-born Australian living now in Israel, have watched from here with deep concern the rising and escalating level of violence. I mean, it was put quite succinctly in a statement made by AJAC, the Israel Jewish Affairs Council, where they said that verbal abuse becomes graffiti, graffiti becomes arson, arson becomes physical violence, which eventually becomes murder. And I think that's what we've seen here today take place in Bondi, a place that is the center of tourism life, of vibrancy and life in Sydney, but certainly also the center of Jewish life in Sydney, where the vast majority, the area where the vast majority of the Jewish community lives in Sydney, where I myself resided not too many years ago. It's truly appalling and still, frankly, sinking in for Jews and supporters of the Jewish and Israeli community around the world.
We've had a couple of contributors to GB News this morning who have been quite critical of the failure of the Australian government to take action against this rising wave of anti-Jewish attacks that you have documented there. Do you share that point of view?
Yes, frankly, I mean, it's been obvious to anyone paying any attention to what's going on in Australia that these attacks have been escalating. And again, it can start with something as simple as verbal abuse of Jews going about their business on the street. The fact that anyone wearing openly Jewish clothing or appearing openly Jewish walking down the street is under threat of incident is on itself appalling. Then that escalates. And as it escalates to the heinous incidents that we've seen, even excluding the horrors that we saw today, there's clearly been a need for a deep-seated response to root out these sort of attacks as they've targeted the Jewish community across Australia. When the awareness came to bear that there was Iranian involvement, that this was organised by a foreign government looking to target the Jewish community in Australia, there was ever more need to make sure and make it abundantly clear that Jews needed to be protected from the specific targeting that was occurring against them. And this is something the government, obviously, as we see from the incident today, failed to do adequately. I mean, the fact that there weren't more police presence that are prepared to stop this sort of incident there at Bondi today is a sign that more needed to be done. It's not to say that we don't appreciate the support and response of the police and other authorities in Australia as Jews around the world. But that being said, a response is far lesser than any sort of preventative measures that should have been taken ahead of time so that we weren't having to deal with this sort of action and having to respond to it, to the deaths, to the horrors, the atrocities that everyone had to witness and go through today. This needs to be nipped in the bud ahead of time, and obviously the authorities in Australia have failed to do so.
I wonder then whether you think that today might mark a turning point in Australia, and indeed possibly much more broadly. You may have heard Anthony Albanese, the Prime Minister of Australia, saying this is an act of evil anti-Semitism. An attack on Jewish Australians is an attack on all Australians. Is that more like the response that you were looking for? And would it now be your hope that that rhetoric will be followed by new actions?
Yes, most certainly. I mean, too late, certainly, but hopefully not too little, and hopefully real action can be taken from here on out. I mean, you pointed out in your conversation with Peter Credlin there, the Port Arthur massacre of 1996, and how that was a turning point for Australia, a move in which the use and proliferation of guns in Australia was massively reduced, effectively removed from everyday life. You'd expect a scale of response on that level after such an incident today. I mean, it really harkens back to the horrors of those days, now nearly 30 years ago, and that the lessons that were learned in that era that Australia took to so distinctly, and that has caused such a reduction in the use of firearms and the use of shooting attacks in Australia. Whatever the response may be, it needs to be deep-seated. It needs to tackle these issues root and stem and make sure that these sort of incidents, these sort of hateful incidents, are not able to fester. Australia prides itself on being a tolerant society, but you cannot tolerate intolerance of that level. It is simply not acceptable. You cannot tolerate that degree of hate-filled horror that would lead to these sort of attacks, where you see one of the most central tourist and activity areas in Sydney on a beautiful summer's eve. The juxtaposition of the horrors that we witnessed against the beauty that is Bondi Beach sunset really need to highlight and be burned into everyone's mind that severe and consequential action needs to be taken.
Asher Westrop-Evans, thank you very much indeed. Asher is a journalist and an Israeli affairs expert, speaking to us from Israel, but Asher is Australian by birth. Now, with me now is my panel, who had come in to talk about other things, the former Conservative advisor Jennifer Powers and broadcaster and journalist Matt Stadlen. Welcome to you both on this rather grim morning. Matt, I don't want to be too personal to begin with. You're Jewish by background. Does that give you a particular response to what's happened today?
I think everyone should be united, Jewish or not, by the horror of what has unfurled in Australia. You and I think, have been to Bondi Beach, fantastic part of a beautiful city, and for murder to take place in the way that it has, on the scale that it has, is profoundly upsetting. And I do worry about Jewish friends around the world, in this country too. We've already seen the horrors of that Manchester synagogue attack, and my first response, you talk about being personal, my first response as soon as I heard of that attack was to go to my local synagogue and show solidarity with people there. And you do worry because Jews are obviously identifiable and places of worship are identifiable. And we know that there is a very serious issue of extremism. And that extremism, to some extent, is indiscriminate, but to some extent it seems increasingly to be targeting Jews from the stories that we've seen in recent months. So, yes, I'm very worried about it.
Yes, Jennifer Powers, those who have been critical of what the Australian government has done, or rather not done, they tell a tale that could be quite familiar for us in the United Kingdom, of opportunities missed, of recommendations not yet responded to, and so on. Do you feel that the Australian and British models are pretty similar? We also have seen attacks on synagogues. We've seen murder at synagogues. We still have demonstrations. We still have people on the street yelling unspeakable things that urge violence, apparently against Jewish people. Do you think we're on parallel tracks here?
Well, I would agree with that analysis. I am sort of saddened at how quickly memories of the Heaton Park synagogue attack have faded from media and public consciousness. This is an unspeakable horror that's unfolded on Bondi Beach, but I do think it casts warnings for us here back in Britain as well. You know, hate doesn't happen in isolation. It happens within a context. And whilst there have been lots of statements said and I'm sure very meaningfully felt, genuinely felt, it is not just about rhetoric, it is about action, and it's about what political leaders and others do on the back of these attacks to stamp down on this sort of anti-Semitism, and also to protect all of us in the public. So I would like to see the government take more meaningful action. I do think we have an issue with incitement to violence in this country, with the rhetoric that is pervasive and which is allowed. We also have not taken a very robust approach to a lot of the content that's happening in mosques and elsewhere. That's not to say that this attack is necessarily from Islamists. We don't know that yet. We only know that it's anti-Semitic because it was targeted at Jews. However, I would say that there has been an outpouring of anti-Semitism from Islamists in the UK over the last, especially the last two and a bit years since October 7th. So I do think it's something that Britain should take seriously.
Matt, I was talking to Asher a moment ago down the line from Israel, and I think he was believing that this could well be a turning point in Australia, that changes, legislation will follow and so on. I wonder, though, whether that could be the result all the way over the world. I mean, do you think that this horrific anti-Jewish attack in Australia is going to change the world for all of us?
We've seen, unfortunately, terror attacks unfold in our own country, numerous terror attacks. I was live on air on a national radio station as a presenter covering the London Bridge terror attack as that was still unfolding, or as it was still unclear what was behind it. And we ask ourselves tough questions every time such an attack happens, and quite rightly so. I would just say on the issue of government action, I think we can be in no doubt that our security services, who clearly work on behalf of the government, are working around the clock to counter extremist threats of every nature. On the issue of anti-Semitism, and as you say, that's all we really know so far, that this is an anti-Semitic attack. Clearly, there is a major problem with anti-Semitism in our country. There's a major problem of anti-Semitism in America, coming from Islamists, coming from some on the extreme Christian right as well. And it is an evil that is blighting society. And you would have thought, given that 6 million Jews were murdered, many of them gassed to death just decades ago, that the penny might have dropped, but sadly it hasn't.
I'm not quite sure whether you responded to my point. Do you think this will be a turning point in Britain and beyond?
What do you mean by a turning point?
Well, I mean, for example, are we going to continue to allow demonstrations on our streets in which people say things like globalise the Intifada. I mean, what could be more globalised?
I think I was very clear.
Australia.
I've sat around this table, a year ago and 2 years ago when these demonstrations were ongoing, and I was very clear that freedom of speech needs to be protected in our country, but freedom of speech does not include incitement to violence. And where anything was said on any of those demonstrations or any of those demonstrations moving forward that breaks the laws of this land, then the law needs to be applied robustly. I think it's a difficult and very challenging area, those demonstrations, because free speech, the freedom to protest, is fundamental to our democracy. And so I would draw the line at illegality.
Same question to you, Jennifer.
I don't feel optimistic. I would be pleasantly surprised should the government take a more robust line, but no, I'm not optimistic. And
what holds the government back from taking a more robust line?
Well, we've seen the US move to ban Muslim Brotherhood in the US, which is Hamas is an offshoot of the Muslim Brotherhood. So we see the US government taking a more robust line. I just feel that there are. It's just not something that motivates the current leadership of the Labour Party to act more robustly on this. I think the police services have taken on a view that isn't just not one I agree with in terms of where to draw the line. I think that these marches are clearly anti-Semitic. I think they're clearly incitement to violence. I don't think they're actually, it's an infringement of free speech or free assembly to restrict and ban the marches and arrest many of the participants, not all, because I think that we've created a whole permission structures here in the UK to hate Jewish people. It has become normalized to hear this rhetoric about globalize the Intifada, and yet we become perhaps surprised when then Jews are killed, whether it's in a synagogue in Manchester or on a beach in Australia. If you repeatedly call for the murder of Jews, then some people will take up arms and do so.
Let's recognise that hate festers in people's bedrooms, doesn't it, as well?
Yeah,
and
you're referring to the internet.
Well, you look at the internet, and the internet, unfortunately, is radicalising people towards all sorts of extremes, whether that's anti-Semitism, whether that's hatred against Muslims. The internet has a vast amount to answer for, specifically some social media sites.
We're going to move on, panel, if you'll forgive me. Thank you very much, panel, for the time being. Jennifer Powers and Matthew Stadlen. We're going to speak now to the editor of Middle East 24, former Israeli intelligence officer Dan Pfefferman. Dan, thank you very much for joining us.
Yeah, glad to be here, although the circumstances are wanting.
Dan, where are you, may I ask?
I'm based in Israel.
OK, that's where you're speaking to us from right now.
Correct.
The reaction of the Israeli government was very quick. The first strong indication that this had been an anti-Jewish terrorist event was coming from statements made officially by the Israeli government. Do you think that Israel had been warning Australia that this was something that was a distinct possibility? Do you think that in Israel people will be thinking that not enough was done to defend the Jewish people of Australia?
I think we've been seeing this trend line for the better part of 2 years. I've been listening to the conversation the last few minutes. This is what globalized the Intifada looks like in practice. It looks like violent marches. It looks like burning the flags first of Israel and then of Australia, the UK, or whatever country they're marching in. And it starts with violent attacks against the Jews. The Jews are always an easy target. The Jews are a minority. There's only 100,000 or so Jews living in Australia. Peaceful, productive, integrated citizens. But what we've known from history is what starts with hatred against Jews, what's called anti-Semitism, very quickly, turns into a broader violence against the society, because hatred and this violence, this anti-Semitism against the Jews, rarely has anything to do with what the Jews, certainly the Jews of Australia, have ever done or not done to anyone. And so we've seen from October 8th, before Israel even understood the October 7th attack, before the dead were counted, before the last of the Hamas terrorists were neutralized or arrested on Israeli soil, you had violent marches in Sydney, but also in London and other places, calling to globalize the Intifada, claiming that there's a genocide. And we've known that there have been other violent attacks, less deadly or thankfully not deadly, against the Australian Jewish community, fire bombings of synagogues. And it's only a matter of time before these radicalization and terror networks, these Islamist terror networks and radicalization networks in Australia and throughout the West are going to succeed in conducting such vile terrorist attacks.
Dan, what does real security look like? I take it that that exists in Israel. I mean, for example, as people gather tonight in Israel to celebrate the first night of Hanukkah, what kind of protections will those people have? What kind of confidence in Israel will people have that they're not going to be attacked?
Well, you know, in Israel, the situation is wholly different because the entire intelligence, the entire domestic intelligence system is geared towards stopping terrorist attacks. And indeed, multiple terrorist attacks of various kinds are thwarted every single week. And smaller terrorist attacks, primarily in Judea and Samaria or the West Bank, are committed almost on a regular basis here. We live with these. And so the entire system is geared to preventing mass terrorist attacks. That's why the security barriers were put up between Israel and the Palestinian areas in the West Bank. That's why the security fence was put up in Gaza. You saw just 2 years ago when it was overrun. In the West, there is a different issue, and that is there are, hundreds of thousands, if not millions of, I hate to say it, primarily Muslim migrants to these countries. Most of them, of course, are peaceful and well integrated, but many are not. And radicalism, something that Middle Eastern countries, not just Israel, but look around the Middle East, look at the United Arab Emirates, look at Saudi Arabia, look at Morocco, look at other more successful Arab countries that have clamped down on Muslim Brotherhood and on radicalization. They understand the threat within their own societies. The West has not really understood that threat. And so what you need to be having is a systemic approach to prevention, to intelligence gathering, to infiltrating these Islamist networks and drawing a much clearer line. Freedom of speech is one thing, freedom to assemble and to protest is another thing, but calling to gas the Jews, as we heard from Sydney on October 8th, outside the Opera House, Khaybar al-Yahud, which is Islamic historical code for wage war on the Jews, globalize the Intifada. These are all things that very, very quickly reach these kinds of conclusions. And that's what the propagators behind this extremism want. They want such attacks on Jewish communities. They want such attacks on the societies in which they live in. And this is a massive, massive threat that Western countries cannot just take sitting by or go into prevention mode. This is not the same as crime. This is part of a much bigger puzzle of societal-wide extremism, radicalization intended to spur violent attacks such as these.
Dan Pfefferman, thank you very much indeed. Editor of Middle East 24 and a former Israeli intelligence officer. Well, good afternoon. It's almost precisely 12 noon. You're watching GB News. If you're just joining us today, at least 11 members of the public have been killed following a mass shooting by two gunmen at Bondi Beach in Sydney. 29 are currently in hospital. One of the gunmen is dead, the other is in a critical condition. The Premier of New South Wales, Chris Minns, confirmed that it was meant to target the Jewish community.
Two individuals began firing on a crowded group of families on Bondi Beach at Archer Park. This cowardly act of terrifying violence is shocking and painful to see and represents some of our worst fears about terrorism in Sydney. I very sadly need to report that as of now, there are at least 12 individuals that have been killed. One of the offenders has also been killed and one is in custody. This attack was designed to target Sydney's Jewish community on the first day of Hanukkah.
His sentiments were echoed by the Australian Prime Minister, That is Anthony Albanese, and he was speaking in Canberra.
This afternoon, there has been a devastating terrorist incident at Bondi at the Hanukkah by the Sea celebration. This is a targeted attack on Jewish Australians on the first day of Hanukkah, which should be a day of joy, a celebration of faith. An act of evil anti-Semitism, terrorism, that has struck the heart of our nation. An attack on Jewish Australians is an attack on every Australian, and every Australian tonight will be, like me, devastated.
Footage from the scene of the attack shows a man wresting a pump-action shotgun from a gunman. The attack happened as people celebrated the Jewish festival of Hanukkah. Australian police say they're currently investigating whether there is a third offender. Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese says that the evil that was unleashed at Bondi Beach Day is beyond comprehension, and that this is a targeted attack on Jewish Australians on the first day of Hanukkah. Sir Keir Starmer has said it's deeply distressing news and described it as an appalling attack. Meanwhile, the Mayor of London, Sir Sadiq Khan, says the Metropolitan Police is increasing its visibility in London's Jewish communities ahead of Hanukkah events. GBNews Home and Security editor Mark White joins us now. Mark, hello. You've been covering this issue all morning. Would you like to summarise where we are now? For example, I personally am somewhat confused now as to whether the at least 12 who have died includes the gunman or whether that excludes the gunman. Are you clear about that particular point?
Yeah, that excludes the gunman. We were at 10, so it was 9 innocent victims and the gunman. That has now risen to 12, and separately they say the gunman has been killed. Another suspected gunman is in a critical condition. And I think what was interesting, Michael, in listening to that news conference from the New South Wales Premier and also the New South Wales Police Commissioner was the number of injured, because before they were talking about no more than a dozen who were being taken to area hospitals. That has increased very significantly to 29, all taken to area hospitals, and worryingly, they describe all of those who have been taken to hospital as being in a serious condition with varying degrees of injuries. They wouldn't go into the age range, although they did allude to a report out there suggesting that a young child may have been one of those who was targeted and shot as well. The other significant news, of course, to come out from this is confirmation of what we all suspected, that this was a terrorist incident. And it wasn't just, the police commissioner said, because of the fact that 2,000 people had been gathered in that area for the Hanukkah celebrations, but also because of information gleaned on one of the attackers, we believe the deceased attacker. And that to me suggests that he was known to the authorities, that he may have been on some kind of extremist watch list. So that, of course, then raises all kinds of questions, Michael, as to whether, if this person was known to the authorities, was there intelligence that was missed here? We see this so often in terrorist incidents because sadly, these people don't commit acts in isolation. They're on a journey, and it's a journey that spirals down to increasing extremism. And during that journey, they will come across the radar of the police and the security services. So they will often be known to the police and the security services. But critical here will be whether any of them had been making threats recently, whether there was any intelligence that suggested they may have been planning something. If that's the case, then some serious questions, of course, for the authorities to answer. But I think the police commissioner cautioned against that kind of speculation at this time, said it was too early to determine whether any intelligence opportunities were missed.
Mark White, for now, thank you very much. I think you'll probably be called upon again quite soon. But at the moment, I can cross to speak to an eyewitness to the attack, Georgie Heath. Georgie Heath, welcome to GB News in the United Kingdom, and my condolences for what you have been through today. May I ask you where you were and what you saw?
Yeah, so I actually currently live in Bondi Beach, and so I was just leaving my house and I could hear the gunshots, and I thought maybe, you know, it was the kids getting up to whatever they were getting up to after the social media ban here, and thinking, you know, they're trying to just entertain themselves with those bangers and that kind of thing. And then, so as I was leaving my house to head down to the beach, I could hear these gunshots and this banging, and then people just running and yelling, you know, get back in the house, get back in the house, there's gunmen, there's gunmen. At this point, no one really knew how many there were. Someone was shouting there were 3, there were 2. And we weren't really sure, so I went back into my house, and you could still hear gunshots. And it's honestly, it's maybe like 2 minutes away from where I live at the moment. I'd literally just come back from the beach and was heading down to go and watch the sunset this evening, because we'd all heard it was going to be a nice sunset, end of the Sunday evening, and in the end, it turned into a very different Sunday evening for everyone. And it's it's been quite an evening here in Bondi Beach, you know, with lots of different WhatsApp groups of various communities and people reporting different things they had seen, and lots of people, you know, a friend of mine was actually had to just basically lock themselves in a stock room in a pub that they were in, because that was the only place they could go. Some others were stuck on the stairs. There were about 30 of them in one place. Another friend of mine was basically hiding behind the bins behind a restaurant that was near where it happened, and was just there for like an hour and a half. You know, there's everyone on their WhatsApp groups being like, is everyone safe? Can everyone send their live locations? Has anyone seen anything extra that's going on? And, you know, when lots of different reports are all coming in from different places at once, it gets very sort of mixed up and convoluted, the story of what's actually happening at the time. And you just get to that point, you're like, right, at least I'm now safe, and I'm, you know, locked in my flat. Me and my flatmate were both home by this point. And there were just helicopters all going overhead, you know, with speakers saying things like, hi, make sure everyone is, you know, if you're not the emergency services, get back in your house, lock your doors, you know, don't go out and about. This isn't for just watching at this point, you know, be safe, go home, make sure you're inside. So it was, it's been quite an evening.
Now, is it? You're still inside your home and you've locked yourself in, and you're not allowed to go out?
No, it was very much like, don't venture out this evening. I think a lot of places as well aren't going to be open tomorrow. And even like, I've been doing some work in a cafe, and they were like, we're not opening tomorrow. There's lots of different places, like gyms around the area, aren't opening tomorrow morning. I think almost as a mark of respect for the people who lost their lives, but then also just because, you know, just considering the safety of the area as well, and just making sure that everything is okay before lots of places reopen and Bondi life comes back to what it should be. I don't know if it ever will really be the same again, but I think, you know, obviously we've seen the images of the man who tackled the guy with a gun, which was just the most incredible display of bravery that I can think of in a very long time. That was, you know, think how many lives he must have saved through that. And then lots of different people, you know, offering up their rooms if someone needs to stay. Someone else had lost their dog and had posted it in a group. And so lots of, you know, while she was running away from the beach, had been separated from her dog. And so there was a big hunt of, you know, people sharing images about this and how they were going to find it. And I think she has been reunited with her dog just through these kind of community efforts. But
Georgie, have you any idea how many shots you heard, or the duration of the period during which there was shooting? Any idea of that?
Honestly, to the point I did start to consider whether someone was setting off fireworks. You know, it wasn't just a couple of gunshots. There were a lot of gunshots. You know, it went on for what I could hear at least a couple of minutes. And I was thinking, what on earth is going on? How have these kids got all these bangers? Why have they got fireworks? What is happening on a random sunny Sunday afternoon? So, you know, it wasn't just a couple of shots. It was extensive gunfire. Yeah.
And so the community is pulling together. Is it a community where there's quite a large Jewish population? Do you have a particular feeling for that Jewish community community,
Yeah,
which has found itself under attack?
Bondi as a whole is quite a diverse community. Obviously, there's a lot of us English around here. There's locals as well, but then there's lots of people of different backgrounds, different heritage. If I walk up from where I live down at Bondi Beach, up towards Bondi Junction, I go past a synagogue, and actually, in the last year, I've noticed there's more security outside it that never used to be there on sort of mornings of worship. And I was thinking, okay, I thought maybe perhaps there was a special visitor or something, and then I've seen it every time I've walked past it now. So I think that has been added just in the last year since I've lived out here. So, whether that was some kind of awareness or just someone had just decided that was a precaution they were going to start taking this year, I'm not sure. But yeah, there's a great diverse community here in Bondi, and I think that's why people are so shocked by it, because it is, it's a great place. It's a really accepting place, and especially this time of year, so many people coming and going. It's peak summer now, holidaymakers, tourists, people moving over like I have, and I think it's just has been quite a shock to everyone. A place, especially on a Sunday afternoon, a sunny Sunday, is such a vibrant place, and I think that's why it's been such a shock to everyone that something like this could happen.
Georgia Heath, thank you so much for joining us in the circumstances. Our condolences, and of course it's going to be a terrible and enduring shock for your community and your neighbourhood. Well, still with me are my panel, the Conservative advisor, former Conservative advisor, Jennifer Powers, and the broadcaster and journalist, Matthew Stadlin. Jennifer, any more reactions? What do you think is emerging about this attack?
Well, I'm fearful to continue listening to the reports, worried that the numbers are going to rise.
Yes.
In terms of the fatalities or the condition of those that may have life-changing injuries. So, it's a horrendous thing to have happened, and we all, share our sympathy with the victims and the Australian public. I think, we've had our fair share of terrorist incidences here in the UK, and, thankfully I haven't myself been caught up in any of them, but it certainly causes you to be, more aware. And we, have friends who volunteer with the CAA, the Campaign Against Antisemitism, and they talk about the rise in anti-Semitic incidences here in the UK. The police reports very similar statistics about the rise, especially since October 7th, 2 years ago. So our Jewish citizens or subjects in this country are dealing with a similar state of fear, and I think that's something that we have to be very mindful of.
It's a very good point that we do have a lot of experience here of terrorism. I mean, I think younger people perhaps forget this, and indeed people who weren't in office when I was during the sort of 80s and 90s also forget this. But I suppose one of the differences that here we're seeing potentially a community being targeted. I mean, if there was a target before, it was politicians, and of course it was the military. Military were very strongly targeted by the IRA, for example. But it wasn't on a sectarian basis in the sense that you weren't going to be bombed because, not even for being a Protestant or a Catholic, actually, on the whole. So does that make it completely different now, that we now think about one part of our community that is particularly vulnerable to attack?
I think Jewish people in this country will feel extremely vulnerable. And I think many in the Jewish community or Jewish communities, and of course many Jews are extremely well integrated, many will have felt under threat for some time. And there are a relatively tiny number of Jews living in this country. I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it's under 300,000.
Really?
Yeah, a really very small number of Jews in this country. And as I said earlier, religious Jews are clearly very visible. Places of worship are very visible. This appalling atrocity in Australia needs to be another warning sign, another reminder to our government to give Jews the protection that they need.
Thank you very much, panel. Please stay with me. But for the moment, a journalist for Sky News Australia, Shari Markson, joins me now. She's live on the scene at Bondi Beach. Shari, thank you very much for joining me. The scene now, can you, for example, bring us up to date with this question about whether there is or is not an explosive device, an IED?
So police have this evening confirmed that they did find explosive devices in a car on Campbell Parade here on Bondi. It's just the main road behind us. So we don't know what that explosive device was intended to be used for. What we do know is that the Australian Jewish community was gathered at a Hanukkah party just behind me here. There were more than 1,000 Australian Jews there when at least 2 gunmen, possibly a third, but confirmed 2, opened fire with long rifle-like weapons. There were about 50 or 60 shots. This went on for a number of minutes. Police have confirmed that 12 people have been killed. A further 29 were shot and are being treated in hospital this evening. We're unfortunately probably expecting the death toll to rise. This has been absolutely horrific, devastating for our local Jewish community. I'm a host here on Sky News Australia. I'm a Jewish Australian. I've been reporting on the anti-Semitism crisis every single day for the past 2 years. I've been imploring the federal government, the Prime Minister, to take action. He hasn't taken enough action on the anti-Semitism that we've seen explode in the wake of October 7. Even our anti-Semitism envoy handed down a report with recommendations 3 or 4 months ago. He still hasn't acted on those recommendations, hasn't even said he will accept them. So the Jewish community has been vulnerable. We've been like sitting ducks here. It's not a surprise that something like this has happened. We've been warning that a serious event, that lives would be lost if the authorities didn't take anti-Semitism seriously, and they just didn't. They didn't act on it because of local domestic political issues. We had a federal election here in May. Some of the marginal seats that were in question are in areas that have a large Muslim community. So the ministers of this Labor government didn't want to be seen to be talking about anti-Semitism so much. It's left us very vulnerable. We have already been living in fear and anxiety. It's the first day of Hanukkah here in Australia. I was at a similar Hanukkah celebration just up the road from the one that was targeted tonight. Families, I mean, I've been here since this afternoon. I've been interviewing people who are on the scene, people who lost the family members or whose family members were shot, parents whose 3-year-old little girl went missing and they found her under the body of a woman who'd been shot. You know, she took the bullet to save this 3-year-old girl who she didn't even know, to save that 3-year-old girl's life after she became separated from her parents. This is the worst massacre we've had in Australia since Port Arthur. This is absolutely devastating. Our country will never be the same. Our Jewish community will never be the same. No one's going to feel safe. If this can happen at Bondi, the iconic Bondi Beach, it can happen anywhere.
Shari, you've given us there some details that I certainly hadn't yet heard, some horrific details there from the scene. Let's just talk about the run-up to this. I believe that you've been quite active, haven't you? You've been organising summits to discuss the crisis of anti-Jewish activity. Is that correct?
Yes, in February this year, I organised an anti-Semitism summit that we televised live on Sky News Australia. It ran for 4 hours. I did it in conjunction with one of the leading Jewish community groups here. I hosted it. We had former prime ministers, we had federal judges, been very prominent members of our community who are in leadership positions come and even, you know, the Deputy Police Commissioner, the Premier came and spoke to participate about what we can do on anti-Semitism, because it has been so horrific since October 8th, basically, the day after October 7th.
Yeah. The image of Shari is
taking
frozen
any
there.
action, and that's why. Apologies, can you still hear me? And
Shari, I
because the
think it's
federal
stabilised,
government
yeah.
wasn't.
Yeah.
Yes, I think it has. Yes.
Go ahead, Shari.
And because the federal government wasn't taking any action, that's why I organised the Sky News Anti-Semitism Summit. And with all of these senior figures in the community, including federal judges, former Prime Minister, Police Commissioner, Premier, etc., we came up with recommendations that we believed would make a tangible difference on anti-Semitism as the outcome from that day. And the opposition agreed to implement it in full. The Prime Minister and the Albanese government did not. They did not adopt a single one of the recommendations from our anti-Semitism summit. I have been the most vocal in the media begging for action because we have been so vulnerable, and you could see that it was escalating and escalating and escalating, and that it would lead to something like this. I mean, so many times on air, I've said, what is it going to take before the Prime Minister acts? Is it going to take loss of life? This is what we've been dreading. And now here we are at Bondi Beach, 12 Australian Jews killed in a terrible massacre, gunned down, and 29 others shot, and now in hospital. I don't know how much footage you've shown, but the scenes on the ground, just bloody bodies sprawled across the park right next to Bondi Beach, or at Bondi Beach. It cannot get more hard.
Sharon Markson, you've experienced something absolutely dreadful there. Thank you so much for joining us on GB News. Sharon Markson, a journalist for Sky News Australia, and she will be speaking live from Bondi Beach. And now we're joined by a former Australian police officer, Vince Carras. Vince, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. How are you?
Vince, I'm well. Are you speaking to me from Australia?
Yes, I am. I live about 5 kilometres from Bondi Beach.
OK. In many ways, the police operation this evening in Australia has been impressive. People will be asking questions there about how this could possibly have happened. We've been hearing about the rising tide of anti-Jewish activity, including violence and attacks. And yet here was a very large and very well publicised gathering of Australian Jewish people, and they have been attacked. Does that raise a question mark in your mind?
It was something that was always on the boil as far as I'm concerned, because we've had experiences in the past with anti-Semitism, something that we are not used to here in Australia, I might say. This has been really something that's eventuated since the October 17 massacre in Israel. And it's gradually been growing and growing and growing. The authorities have done a magnificent job in curtailing what could have been a worst case scenario at Bondi, and the bravery of one civilian in disarming one of the offenders is beyond reproach. He is a magnificent human being for doing what he did. He would have saved many, many lives as a result. But the police have a big task ahead. The big task is gathering the intelligence they need to pursue not just the offenders they have in custody, but the future ones. They need to re-examine all their intelligence files now and have a look at maybe regrading some of the threats that may have been put aside as maybe along the lines of, this guy does not present as a threat. Well, maybe he does now. And these are the things that they need to re-evaluate as they go along the journey of investigating and formulating future plans to safeguard the Jewish community, but not just the Jewish community. May I add, we are a very integrated society here in Australia. We have many, many people from many, many races, from many religions who live in peace. And this, as I say, has only been a recent phenomena for us, in the sense that since those October 17 massacre, this revelation that's come into our society here in Australia, and we're so far away from everyone, has been totally disruptive. It needs to be addressed, and it will be addressed. Eventually, it will be addressed properly by the authorities. We have a very good commissioner, a New South Wales Police Commissioner, who's only been in the job less than 3 months. And he has the experience, the intelligence and the drive to make sure the police are on top of this whole situation.
2 officers are amongst the injured, and all the injuries of all the people are described as serious, although there's a variety of severity in their injuries. Would you like to say a word about those Australian police officers who've taken a bullet today?
Well, those Australian police officers who've taken a bullet know that every time they put a uniform on, they are a target. Every time you walk down the street, you are a target. And at the end of the day, it's something that stays at the back of your mind. And unfortunately for him, those two police officers, they have been injured. But hopefully they'll come out of that well and truly reinvigorated and back to normal duties. I'm praying for them. I know that one of them is pretty serious, and I'm sure that the New South Wales Police will do their very best to ensure that he pulls through. The other thing I want to say too is that despite what's happened today, there are many, many good people in the Jewish community who will make sure that this does not ensure that does not somehow cause rage amongst other groups of people. I know the feeling I had when I first saw these reports coming through, and I just hope that it doesn't escalate. And that's the problem the police are going to have, trying to stop any escalation of what's happened. This is a terrible tragedy, a terrible tragedy.
Yeah, I think we heard similar sentiments from the Police Commissioner and indeed from the Premier of New South Wales. Thank you very much indeed for joining us, Vince Carras, from close by the scene of the massacre at Bondi Beach. He is a former Australian police officer. My panel is still with me, the former Conservative advisor Jennifer Powers and journalist Matthew Stadlen. I must say, as we hear more and more reports, it simply becomes more horrifying what has happened. I mean, with every detail, it becomes more dire. There clearly are going to be, I mean, some people may think this is not the time to raise this question, but there clearly are going to be a lot of questions asked about what the reaction of the Australian governments has been to what has been a rising tide of anti-Jewish activity. I think we've now had at least 3 people who've come on knowledgeable about these matters, who've been very critical about a report on anti-Semitism that apparently was received by the government but had not yet led to any action. So it seems like a political reaction is inevitable to this.
It's difficult for us, and none of us, I think, are experts in Australian politics, to comment too precisely on how the Australian government has been dealing with anti-Semitism. But as I say, this needs to be another wake-up call, this atrocity in Sydney, not just to the Australian government, but to our own government and governments around the world. Jews need to be protected. And we've certainly seen a massive spike in anti-Semitism in our country since the horrors of October the 7th and the Israeli response to October the 7th. And there just is no place for anti-Semitism in our society. My concern, one of my concerns, is that these sorts of horror events leave scars. We could all remember vividly 7/7 in this country in 2005. Strangely enough, in the middle of a domestic Ashes series. There's a lot of focus on Australia at the moment because we're in the middle of an Ashes series in Australia. I saw that former England captain Michael Vaughan was locked in a restaurant briefly for his and other customers' protection. He's thankfully now safely home. These events leave scars, and a big part of them is how we respond to them. And as a wider society, it's perhaps easier for us to carry on with life as normal, to make sure we get back on tube trains as we did after the horrors of 7/7. I worry it's more difficult for such a small community as the Jewish community in this country, and therefore it is absolutely imperative that we stand shoulder to shoulder with our Jewish neighbours. As you know, I'm half Jewish myself.
It was the point I was trying to make clumsily earlier, that the attacks that we suffered, for most members of the public, were entirely arbitrary. But this is, as you
more targeted,
a small community.
Under 300,000, I think, according to that census of 2021.
Which is potentially being targeted. And therefore, the sense of danger is very, very great.
Yes, and if you live a Jewish lifestyle, you will likely feel it more intensely. I come from a secular Jewish background. Yes, like anyone with a Jewish identity, I would have been murdered by Hitler, but I probably feel it less than some of my Jewish religious friends. And it is absolutely imperative, as I say, that those people are made to feel as secure as they possibly can be in the current climate.
Matthew earlier was talking about the need to balance the freedom of speech with whatever measures are taken, and surely that's a very good point. But I suppose if you wanted to make a visible change at this moment, the visible change you would make in Britain is to stop the ongoing demonstrations with people talking for a globalised intifada. I mean, that would be that would be a step, wouldn't it? That would be a sign of solidarity.
I think it would be beneficial for public safety as well, and certainly for the Jewish community. It's something that they have long called for. I mean, I have a lot of sympathy for the police, both in this country and Australia, with regard to preventing this sort of attack. I mean, you can monitor people, but, how do you anticipate when that sort of hatred or their belief system is going to, topple over into violence? I think terrorism, at the end of the day, is downstream of culture. It's downstream of a belief system. And so I think that's why the challenge is so much greater for whether it's Australian society or for our own, in terms of how do we ensure that that sort of visceral hatred for another group, a group of people, is not allowed to fester and to grow in Britain. And I think what you say about the hate marches is right, but I think it's only one thing of a huge range of measures that need to be taken to try to create a more cohesive society, and one that doesn't tolerate such intolerance.
I disagree with some of that, because, as I've said, radicalisation can take place, and we know does take place, in people's bedrooms, on their laptops, on their mobile devices. And the idea that we would not still be at risk, and that Jewish people in this country and around the world would not still be at risk if the pro-Palestinian marches had not taken place, I just find fanciful. And I would say, on what is a free speech channel, that protecting freedom of speech in our democracy is essential, and therefore I'm very clear about where the line should be, where anyone on those marches, and many of the people on those marches will have been marching in good faith for the people in Gaza, but where anyone on those marches was spreading hate, was breaking the law of this land, then we've got the resources available to us to clamp down on it.
Just a quick rejoinder. I in no means would I argue that having controlled those marches more strictly would have meant that the Jewish community would suffer no anti-Semitism. I'm simply saying that I think that there was a huge amount of rhetoric and behaviour at those marches, which was clearly, within the context of the marches, anti-Semitic and was hate speech and was incitement to violence, and it should have been policed very, very differently. I think it has created a permission structure in this country where anti-Semitism has been allowed to grow and become normalized. That's the case across universities and many schools as well. Perhaps even some segments of the media, which have behaved over the last 2 years as a bit of a mouthpiece for Hamas. And so I think there's enough responsibility to go around, and I think there's opportunities for a whole range of measures that would at least stamp down, on no means, certainly, entirely solve the problem, but which would help dampen down the huge rise in anti-Semitism that we've suffered here in Britain over the last 2 years.
One reflection that has occurred to me is that the objective of terrorism is to create terror, self-evidently. And of course, Hanukkah is a festival of 8 nights, and the first night will be in Britain tonight. The first night was already in Australia. Of course, Australia comes to this, with New Zealand first around the world. So now Jewish people all around the world, as they celebrate their 8 nights of Hanukkah, will have this terrible event in Bondi Beach very much on their minds. The objective of terrorism is to create terror. Thank you very much again, Jennifer Powers and Matthew Stadlen. Now we are joined by journalist Adrian Falk. Adrian, can you hear me? Adrian Falk, we think, is going to come up on the line fairly soon. Adrian, are you there?
Yes, I'm here. Can you hear me, Michael?
I can, but I don't know where you are, Adrian. Where are you speaking to me from?
Actually in Sydney, not too far away from Bondi Beach, unfortunately, tonight.
Adrian, we've had a number of people on our programme today who say that really more should have been done about anti-Semitic violence in Australia, that there's been a real spike in this activity, that there have been reports, that there have been recommendations. Do you join in that sentiment?
Absolutely, Michael. Tonight our Prime Minister has announced that this is an act of evil anti-Semitism. This is a targeted attack on the Australian Jewish community. But these words, I fear, Michael, are too little, too late. Since the 7th of October, since that war broke out, we've had questionable anti-Semitism on the Opera House steps, where they said, no, it wasn't gas the Jews or wear the Jews. But fast forward to this year, we've had parades on Sydney Harbour Bridge, where they were out and proud behind Clover Moore, our Lord Mayor of Sydney, headlining, where they were holding the dictator of Iran's photo. They were parading signs saying Zionism is Nazism, where they were also proudly waving Hamas flags with nothing being done. Now, a month after that, September of this year, which was actually on Father's Day, on the shores of Bondi Beach, we had a pro-Palestinian march, which also saw anti-Jewish behaviour as well. It's been 3 months just since then, and the community were warning the government that something like this tonight would unfold. And now this is why we have terror on one of our biggest tourist hotspots.
After the Port Arthur massacre in 1996, Australia acted very, very quickly in a bipartisan way to bring in some of the strictest anti-gun control in the world. Do you imagine that there could be such a bipartisan effort now in Australia to react to this appalling massacre on Bondi Beach?
Yeah, definitely. You know, the Australian, the Liberal government then actually within 12 days outlawed guns, and that did something productive from that. But as I was saying, since the 7th of October, when the Jewish community here in Australia were crying out, like the rest of the Jewish community across the world, saying something needs to be done against this hate and anti-Semitic acts. And it's not just these acts. Don't forget, we've had schools being graffitied, homes being firebombed. This has all been taken place in the Bondi Eastern Suburbs area. At one stage, we had local police helicopter patrols for our safety. And I feel like nothing has really escalated beyond those events, which is why now the community are unfortunately reeling and really are scared for what's next.
But let me put that question to you again, if I may. Do you think that this act, because it is so horrific, will lead to the sorts of changes that you and other people have been seeking in recent months?
Look, we only can pray and hope so. Tonight is the first night of Hanukkah, as it was reported. It's a time of miracles, and let's not forget that. And let's hope that a miracle will happen, that these changes will take place, that the Jewish community have been asking and praying for.
The words of Anthony Albanese tonight, I think you quoted them. Would you say that the Prime Minister is now, whatever criticisms you may have had in the past, has got himself, as it were, onto the right page? An act of evil anti-Semitism, he said, an attack on Jewish Australians is an attack on all Australians. And of course, he also paid tribute to the heroism of the police officers who are injured and the member of the public who disarmed one of the gunmen.
Of course, those words are appreciated, but they're too little too late. Let's not forget, back in the university days, there's footage of Anthony Albanese, our PM, university parading at a pro-Palestinian event back then. And, you know, the community, the Jewish community here in Australia won't ever forget that.
Some of the things you've said today are, you know, very, very critical. You're making some very strong points. A number of other people have been on this programme doing the same thing. What is the hope that Australians will be brought together rather than separated by this appalling atrocity?
I do agree with the Prime Minister where he said this is an attack on the Jewish people and Australians as a whole. Unfortunately, today is a turning point in our Australian history. Australians, majority of Australians, we are a multicultural country. We want to live in peace and harmony. The Jewish community have integrated themselves within the Australian community. And many people across social media, you'll see, are deeply saddened and shocked. I still think we have to think that this, unfortunately, was a terrorist attack. And yes, you know, while targeted against the Jewish community, it doesn't echo the thoughts of every Australians, but it's very hard to also discount all the anti-Semitic acts that have happened over the past 2 years here in Australia and internationally.
Adrian Falk, thank you very much indeed for joining us. Our condolences to the Jewish Australian community and actually to all Australians too. Now, here is a clip of what the President of Israel, Isaac Herzog, had to say earlier.
In these very moments, our sisters and brothers in Sydney, Australia, are being attacked by vile terrorists in a very cruel attack on Jews who went to light the first candle of Hanukkah on Bondi Beach. Our heart goes out to them. Our heart misses a beat. The entire nation of Israel misses a beat in this very moment as we pray for the recovery of the wounded. We pray for them, and we pray for those who've lost their lives. We send our warmest strength from here, from Jerusalem, and we repeat our alert time and again to the Australian government to seek action and fight against the enormous wave of anti-Semitism which is plaguing Australian society.
That was the President of Israel, Isaac Herzog, speaking earlier, and making clear that Israel had warned Australia on repeated occasions about the rising tide of anti-Semitism in Australia. We're joined now by Dion Taylor, who's the Communications Manager for the Australia, Israel and Jewish Affairs Council. Dion, welcome to GB News. From where are you speaking to me, please?
Sydney. Thank you for having me on your program. And I'm just about a 10-minute walk from Bondi Beach, where up until about an hour ago, I could hear the sirens and the absolute chaos that has been unfolding throughout the evening.
Yes, chaos, of course, there has been a massacre as well. There's also been a remarkable response, I think, by the security services. 2 police officers have been injured. One we hear pretty badly. There's been remarkable footage of a member of the public wrestling with one of the gunmen. How does the community of Bondi cope with this? I mean, is this a moment where we're seeing extraordinary acts of a community pulling together and trying to reassure its Jewish community?
You have to understand that the Jewish community in Sydney is really, really small. We're only about 50,000 people, of which the majority live in the eastern suburbs area, which is where Bondi Beach is. And the event tonight at the first night of Hanukkah was well attended by hundreds of people in our community. There was also a bar mitzvah that was happening at the beach, and many other people just go to Bondi Beach on a regular occasion, not just Jewish community. Just Australians and tourists. It's an iconic destination, and no one expects for a terrorist attack to happen at Bondi Beach any time to anybody. And the fact that this was an attack on the Jewish community on the first night of Hanukkah is actually no surprise to the Jewish community. We have been calling on our government to make tighter restrictions to not only immigration laws, but laws in Australia. We've seen hate speech, graffiti, marches against the Jewish community, open anti-Semitic attacks of arson and now murder. And our government is just not doing enough to keep us safe and to keep us protected. And people that I know have been shot. Now say there's 12 people that have been murdered that night, absolute chaos. And we are just in shock. We've got really tight gun laws in Australia. We do not have a violent community, and these incidences should never, ever happen on our shores, least to the Jewish community.
My condolences, of course. I'm particularly shocked to hear that you know some of the people who have been shot, who are suffering so badly today, victims killed and families mourning today. And you say this was no surprise to you. You could really foresee this sort of thing, could you?
Yeah, I mean, it was just a matter of time before something of this scale actually happened. And news reporters and the Jewish community and our Jewish security have been warning the government and police that it is inevitable that something like this scale was going to happen. And here we are. Hanukkah is the most joyous festival. It's our summer holidays now. School is finished. It's a busy time of year. It's really festive. And now it's just got this dark cloud, and we just pray for the safety and for full recovery for those that are injured. There's dozens of them who are fighting for their lives now in hospital, and families are mourning their loved ones who just went to Bondi Beach innocently and were killed.
Dion, why did you make a link with immigration just then? What was your point there?
There have been many calls from community members to tighten the immigration laws in Australia. We've seen a lot of hate speech. We've seen a lot of demonstrations that have happened. And this is to protect all Australians, not just the Jewish community, but all Australians. And our government have been weak for many years on that.
Do you expect things to change in Australia now? Do you think there'll be an intense and proactive reaction to this from politicians?
Gosh, I really, really, really hope so. I cannot believe that it has taken this for them to actually take a stance on anti-Semitism and anti-terror. I know that the Jewish community really is expecting a huge amount of change, but I would say the same for all Australians. I personally have received dozens of messages from my non-Jewish friends who know that this is my community who's been attacked, who have reached out with concern and absolute shock and shame that it has come to this. Them even saying we are not safe here in Australia, and really cannot believe that it would have taken an incident like this to create some hopefully everlasting safety and change for us.
And what changes would you be calling for, do you think? You've made the point that the Jewish community is quite small. Therefore, protecting the Jewish community it strikes me as not infeasible. I mean, a small group of people can be protected.
Yeah, I mean, we do have the protection from the New South Wales Police, certainly outside our synagogues at high holidays, and there's a huge community security presence at Jewish schools and synagogues, places of worship, sometimes with the support of New South Wales Police and sometimes with private security, of which, as a parent of sending children to a Jewish school, we pay very high security levies to keep our kids safe. And it's shocking to think that it's actually should just be mandatory that not only we have the security services, but we also have the police presence at any Jewish institution, whether it be a school or a synagogue or, outdoor community events like this Hanukkah festival.
Have you any idea how long it's been, Dion, that you and other parents before you perhaps, have been paying levies at your school in order to have protection of your children at school?
We have always paid levies. Even when I was a child going to a Jewish school, my parents paid levies.
Extraordinary. Dion Taylor, yeah. You and your community are obviously in shock. And
we are.
I'm so sorry that we are interviewing you on such a painful occasion. So sorry that we have the occasion to speak to you, but thank you for your courage in coming and talking to us today.
Thank you for your time. Thank you.
Dion Taylor, Communications Manager for the Australia, Israel and Jewish Affairs Council. Just before we go back talking to my panel, let's get some of the reaction which has been coming in to the attack. The Prime Minister, Sir Keir Starmer, has reacted to the shooting, posting the following message on X. Deeply distressing news from Australia. The United Kingdom sends our thoughts and condolences to everyone affected by the appalling attack in Bondi Beach. I'm being kept updated on the developing situation. The Leader of the Opposition, Kemi Badenoch, has reacted to the attack, also posting on X. Heartbreaking scenes emerging from Bondi Beach of what looks like another despicable terrorist atrocity. As Jews across the UK gather to welcome Hanukkah, we must once again remind ourselves of the enduring power of the story of Maccabees, not only to Jewish history, but to universal themes of resilience, courage and hope. We need them more than ever in the battle of light and darkness. Kemi Badenoch there, referring to the origins of Hanukkah in the 2nd century BC. The Jews recovered Jerusalem and dedicated, I think, the second temple. And in a miracle, one of the lamps in the temple burnt perpetually, or I think for 7 days or 8 nights probably, even though it had no oil. And that is why Hanukkah is celebrated with the lighting of lights and food is cooked in oil. All of these are references to that highly historic event. Reform UK leader Nigel Farage has reacted to the tragic events in Australia, posting on X, "The Hanukkah party shooting in Australia is horrendous. The threat is everywhere." Returning now to my panel, the former Conservative advisor Jennifer Powers and the broadcaster and journalist Matthew Stadlin. Matthew, what do you think of that from Nigel Farage? The threat is with us everywhere.
Well, I'm not sure it was the most responsible reaction. It's certainly not reassuring, but of course, as with many populist messages, there is a grain of truth there. And you were saying earlier about how when you were talking to Dion, that very moving interview, and you could see the horrors and the trauma of what had played out on her face, I thought. Very powerful indeed. But you were talking about the Jewish community being very small, which it is in Australia, which it is here in the United Kingdom. Therefore, it should be possible to protect them. Well, what needs to happen is that the government in this country needs to do everything it possibly can to protect Jews. But unfortunately, where there is the threat of extremism, and I can't imagine a time in our future where there will not be a threat of extremism, none of us are completely safe.
Yes, people very readily issue these messages saying we're going to ensure that people are safe, but the fact is that you can never ensure that.
No, but you've also...
That is the reality.
You've also correctly identified that while we all experience a degree of risk every time we leave our homes, not just from terrorism, but we're talking about terrorism today, there is a peculiarly sinister element to this, which is that it is a tiny minority being targeted.
I think it's also sinister that it's happening at religious holidays when families come together. I mean, we had the stabbing at the synagogue in Manchester only 8 or 10 weeks ago, and that was on Yom Kippur, the highest holiday in the Jewish calendar. And here we have the Bondi Beach massacre on Hanukkah. I mean, I was at a Christmas fair for children at my church yesterday. And, there were probably 100 of us gathered together in the church hall. And to think that something like that for Jews is being targeted where families come together to celebrate a religious holiday is poignant but chilling.
I go back to my point about, what is the objective of terrorism? I fear that the terrorist thinks quite carefully about this, that forever Yom Kippur will be associated with Manchester. Forever Hanukkah will be associated with Bondi Beach. Forever Bondi Beach now will be associated with a massacre.
Absolutely. The symbolism is by its very nature powerful, and it does stick in all of our collective memories so much better. And I think it's something that also breeds the fear you talk about, because every time there is a Jewish holiday or another significant date in the calendar, whether it be October 7th or another date, that Jews around the world and perhaps all of us will start our day with a bit of trepidation.
Which is why I think it's really important in the face of these horrors that we try our best, collectively and individually, not to react out of fear. Fear is understandable, it's part of being a human being. But President Roosevelt said in the 1930s, amidst the Great Depression, there is nothing to fear but fear itself. And I think there's some truth in that. Fear itself can lead to fear. And if you think back to 7/7, something I've mentioned already, it was incumbent on us to get back on tube trains. Now, there is a difference here, which is I think that the Jewish community are particularly vulnerable. And I'm certainly not lecturing other Jews about how they should go about their lives, but I suspect the vast majority of them will act in a very resilient way.
Very powerful words. We can bring you reports that the suspect has been named in local media as 24-year-old Naveed Akram. His driver's licence says he lives in Bonnyrigg, which is a suburb of Sydney. Not entirely clear to me, unless someone will tell me whether we're talking there about the gunman who's dead or the gunman who is in hospital. But anyway, I think I might just repeat that bit of news. So we understand that a suspect has been named in local media as 24-year-old Naveed Akram. His driver's licence says he lives in Bonnyrigg, which is a suburb of Sydney. what was your reaction to what Matthew just said? I mean, it's a marvellous phrase, there's nothing to fear but fear itself. It's not quite true. I mean, fear, I'm afraid, is rational because of what we've just seen happen. I'm sure it is true that fear of fear makes everything worse, and you need to approach things not only with fear, but also with courage and also with resilience. And maybe that's quite a lot to ask, you know, just a few hours after this appalling atrocity.
Yeah, I think there's a difference between refusing to let fear dominate our lives and sort of getting on with it without a second thought or without having meaningful reflection. And I would hate for that, you know, a gung-ho attitude of, you know, let's just all get back to normal. I would worry about that, you know, dampening the necessary reflection by the government and by us as a society about how we create a more cohesive society that doesn't breed the type of hatred that fuels anti-Semitism, which can result in these acts of violence. You know, we have people being taunted when they go into their synagogue here in London. You know, a violent rhetoric, you know, hateful rhetoric shouted at them and their children as they come in and out of synagogue. I mean, the fact that the Jewish community has to pay for its security because of the amount of hatred here in the UK, which we all sort of become accustomed to. We sort of become normalized that this is what just the reality of what 300,000 or a segment of that 300,000 Jewish community, which is regular attendees to synagogue, has to face, or going to Jewish schools, Jewish day schools. I don't think it should be normalized. I think there should be a responsibility by the government to say what are the upstream causes of this amount of anti-Semitism.
To put this in context, I mean, it's interesting to me. I think this is going to be, you know, an event that marks a turning point. I don't exactly know what that will be. But, you know, as I was preparing for this programme today, I was aware that there had been a mass shooting in Rhode Island at Brown University. But we haven't actually even mentioned that on this programme until now. And I believe there are literally hundreds of mass shootings in the United States each year. But what has happened at Bondi Beach has occupied GBNews for all this morning. And indeed, I think all the channels have just stuck on this subject entirely, because this isn't this isn't a mass shooting at a university. This is an anti-Jewish action. And it is that, I think, which has made it different. Is that right?
I think so. I mean, I did some cursory research, not verified, so it may be wrong before I came on air, that I think in 2023 there were nearly 18,000 gun murders in America. So I think part of why we're focusing quite rightly on the appalling scenes in Sydney today is because it is so unusual, thankfully, but also because, as you say, Jews have been targeted. A tiny minority of people relatively living in America have been targeted. Jews have been targeted in this country as well. And that's why I say, of course, fear, you're right, is rational, but you're also right when you say terrorists want us to be afraid. And that's why I say that there perhaps is a rational fear of fear, because if we live in fear, the terrorists win.
Thank you very much indeed to my panel, Jennifer Powers and Matthew Stadlin. Thank you for approaching this with your wisdom, humanity and delicacy. Now, GB News Home and Security Editor Mark White joins us once again. Mark, in the time that we've been on air, has anything become clearer to you? Have you had any new reports that help us to understand what has happened?
Well, we're now in the position to name one of the two suspected gunmen. Remember, of course, one gunman was shot dead. Another is in a critical condition. That man we can name as 24-year-old Naveed Akram, a man of Pakistani origin, originally from Lahore in Pakistan. A driver's license belonging to Naveed Akram was recovered at the scene. That says that he lives in Bonnyrigg, a suburb of Sydney, and that would chime with other news that we've been getting, Michael, that indicate that police officers, specialist teams have raided property in the Bonnyrigg area of Sydney as part of this ongoing investigation into what is now confirmed as a terrorist attack targeting the Jewish community on Bondi Beach, as they had gathered in their many hundreds for this ceremony to mark the beginning of Hanukkah celebrations, with, of course, that candle lighting ceremony. It was at that point when 2 gunmen opened fire. And also when we heard from the police commissioner and the Premier of New South Wales just an hour or so ago, they confirmed that 12 people had now died as a result of being struck by gunfire. 29 others have been injured, a very significant increase in the original number of injured we were told about, which was no more than a dozen. But that has increased to 29 people that have been taken to area hospitals. We don't have a breakdown in terms of the sex or indeed the ages of those who were shot, except for a bit more information on 2 of those who were shot. According to New South Wales Police, they were police officers involved in what was effectively a shootout. I watched the video, the longest video to date, shot by a passerby, that goes on for some 7 to 8 minutes before the last of the attackers is finally brought down by police gunfire. But police exchanging gunfire with the 2 attackers over a number of minutes, as clearly people were still in that area taking shelter, trying to hide from the hail of bullets. Weapons recovered. We saw a shotgun lying by a palm tree. This was a shotgun, a pump-action shotgun, that was wrestled from the arms of one of the attackers by the most incredibly brave local member of the public, who ran between 2 parked cars, jumped on that attacker and managed to wrestle that shotgun from his clutches before the attacker then retreated back up onto a small bridge alongside their accomplice at that point of view. Now, the police commissioner in New South Wales said one of the reasons why they were confident in declaring this now a terrorist attack was because of information received. Now, we understand that information received relates to one of the suspects known to authorities. Now, it may be that they were on a terror watch list, and that's why the police were confident to declare this a terrorist incident. Of course, the other relevant factor here is the fact that the police themselves now acknowledge that it was members of the Jewish community that were being targeted at this Hanukkah celebration. And interestingly, in the video that I watched, which is just so chilling, seeing the 2 attackers opening fire on members of the public there. At some points, those gunmen on the bridge are just waving at other members of the public who are shouting at them as if to shoo them away, as if they're not their targets, but the targets that they are looking for are those down at the Hanukkah celebrations. So absolutely chilling, and it will form part of the ongoing investigation without doubt. The police will want to get a hold of as much in the way of a video and other information as they can to piece together this. Now, 2 other important pieces of information to bring you. Police had indicated that there may be a 3rd suspect. They're not ruling that out, but as yet no news of any 3rd arrest in relation to this terrorist attack. but they did confirm that suspected improvised explosive devices were found in a car parked nearby, and that the IED and the vehicle was linked to one of the attackers. Well, bomb disposal teams have been on site working to make that area safe. We're told that they have taken away that suspected IEDs away from the scene, and that area has now been declared safe, although of course it is an active crime scene, and as such we are seeing very significant forensic and detective resources in at the scene now to begin the slow time piecing together of exactly what happened throughout the course of this shootout, with those members of the Jewish community being specifically targeted. It happened at 6:47 in the evening, police receiving multiple reports of gunfire ringing out in that area. They sent significant resources, but as I just explained, even when police arrived, they were involved in this protracted shootout with the two gunmen on that little bridge overlooking the area where the Hanukkah celebrations were taking place. The Premier of Australia, Anthony Albanese, condemned the attack as well. Clearly all of Australia on alert now, but also pleas to the local community to stay calm, not to go out and to protest. Understandably, feelings are running high, they say, but the best thing that they can do at the moment is just allow the police and the investigators to get on with their investigation. This is GB News, live and continuing coverage of the terrorist attack in Bondi Beach, Sydney.
Good afternoon, I'm Dawn Neeson, and just to recap, if you are joining us, at least 12 people have been killed at Bondi Beach in Sydney, with 29 currently in hospital. One of the gunmen is among the dead. Footage from the scene shows a man wresting a pump-action shotgun from one of the gunmen. The attack happened as people celebrated the Jewish festival of Hanukkah, which starts today. In a press conference, the New South Wales Police Premier, Chris Mims, said that one of the gunmen had been killed and another was in custody.
Two individuals began firing on a crowded group of families on Bondi Beach at Archer Park. This cowardly act of terrifying violence is shocking and painful to see and represents some of our worst fears about terrorism in Sydney. I very sadly need to report that as of now, there are at least 12 individuals that have been killed. One of the offenders has also been killed and one is in custody. This attack was designed to target Sydney's Jewish community on the first day of Hanukkah.
Just to reiterate there, 12 dead, 29 injured, including a child and a police officer. Australian police say they are currently investigating if there is a third offender. Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese says the evil that was unleashed at Bondi Beach today is beyond comprehension.
This afternoon, there has been a devastating terrorist incident at Bondi at the Hanukkah by the Sea celebration. This is a targeted attack on Jewish Australians on the first day of Hanukkah, which should be a day of joy, a celebration of faith. An act of evil anti-Semitism, terrorism, that has struck the heart of our nation. An attack on Jewish Australians is an attack on every Australian, and every Australian tonight will be, like me, devastated.
Strong words. More than 50 gunshots were heard as hundreds of people fled the scene in Sydney at around 6:40 p.m. local time.
Ran onto the beach. I guess everyone ran onto the beach. It was pretty terrifying. And yeah, I eventually went back to see what was happening. A few people helped a few old people get up and get out of there, but it was like there were lots of bodies on the floor.
There has been plenty of reaction here in the UK, with the Prime Minister, Sir Keir Starmer, saying it is deeply distressing news and described it as an appalling attack. London Mayor Sadiq Khan has announced that extra officers from the Metropolitan Police will be on the streets of London following the attack. He says, "My thoughts and condolences, along with the rest of London, are with everyone affected by the horrific attack at Bondi Beach, Australia today." Meanwhile, Reform UK leader Nigel Farage has reacted to the tragic events in Australia, saying the Hanukkah party shooting in Australia is horrendous. The threat is everywhere.
Genuinely horrendous. Last I hear, it's 10 dead and many, many wounded. I did see some video of an heroic Australian, taking the gun out of the hands of one of these terrorists. Desperately sorry for the Jewish community in Sydney, which is quite considerable. But equally, you realise actually the threat to the Jewish people is everywhere. It's not just in Manchester or in parts of North London, it's all over the world. And there is this real poison.
Earlier, we were joined by Sky News Australia journalist Shari Markson, who was speaking to us from Bondi Beach.
Police have this evening confirmed that they did find explosive devices in a car on Canberra Parade here on Bondi. It's just the main road behind us. So we don't know what that explosive device was intended to be used for. There were about 50 or 60 shots. This went on for a number of minutes. I'm a Jewish Australian. I've been reporting on the anti-Semitism crisis every single day for the past 2 years. I've been imploring the federal government, the Prime Minister, to take action. He hasn't taken enough action on the anti-Semitism that we've seen explode in the wake of October 7. Even our anti-Semitism envoy handed down a report with recommendations 3 or 4 months ago. He still hasn't acted on those recommendations, hasn't even said he will accept them. So the Jewish community has been vulnerable. We've been like sitting ducks here. It's not a surprise that something like this has happened. We've been warning that a serious event, that lives would be lost if the authorities didn't take anti-Semitism seriously, and they just didn't. They didn't act on it because of local domestic political issues. We had a federal election here in May. Some of the marginal seats that were in question are in areas that have a large Muslim community. So the ministers of this Labor government didn't want to be seen to be talking about anti-Semitism so much. It's left us very vulnerable. We have already been living in fear and anxiety. It's the first day of Hanukkah here in Australia. I was at a similar Hanukkah celebration just up the road from the one that was targeted tonight. Families, I mean, I've been here since this afternoon. I've been interviewing people who are on the scene, people who lost the family members or whose family members were shot, parents whose 3-year-old little girl went missing and they found her under the body of a woman who'd been shot. She took the bullet to save this 3-year-old girl who she didn't even know, to save that 3-year-old girl's life after she became separated from her parents. This is the worst massacre we've had in Australia since Port Arthur. This is absolutely devastating. Our country will never be the same. Our Jewish community will never be the same. No one's going to feel safe. If this can happen at Bondi, the iconic Bondi Beach, it can happen anywhere.
Yeah, you can see live pictures on your screen now of the scene. Very dark, very quiet now. Obviously the tape from the police vehicles there still absolutely devastating. And as you've just heard, Australia has seen the largest spike in anti-Semitic attacks of all the J7 countries. The J7 refers to the 7 countries around the world that have the largest Jewish communities. That obviously does include the UK as well as America, Australia, Canada, France and Germany, to name but some of them there. So it's not like this was unexpected in a way. The J7 meeting task force held their first meeting ever in Australia for the first time at the beginning of December, which just goes to show exactly how bad the threat to the Jewish community in Australia was being taken. And you also heard there that pretty much nothing has been done after that meeting, and the threat has escalated. Breaking in the last hour, we can now name one of the alleged attackers. That's authorities in Australia have confirmed that Naveed Akram, 24, from Bonnyrigg in Sydney's southwest, was one of the attackers. You can see a picture of him there. His driving licence has also been found at the scene. He was shot by the authorities, is arrested, remains in custody and remains in hospital. But just to reiterate, 12 people are dead. They went for a picnic by the sea. They're dead, including a child and a police officer. And as you've heard earlier on from Michael Portillo show, some incredibly brave Australians there. Possibly more would have been killed if one man had not run in and grabbed the gun from one of the attackers. Incredibly proud people, incredibly brave people as well. And interesting what Anthony Albanese, the Prime Minister, says, that his government now, this affects every Australian, not just Jewish Australians, every Australian. Showing some backbone that you do wonder is slightly lacking in some other countries, it has to be said. OK, now let's talk to activist Lily Moo, who's joining me in the studio. Lily has spent many years now fighting against anti-Semitism. Lily, just start your background, why you are so involved in fighting anti-Semitism, not just in this country, but around the world.
Hello to you and all of your audience. And first and foremost, my deepest condolences to the Jewish community around the world, especially to Australia and all the families who have been affected by this terrorist tragedy. It is indeed an act of terrorism. What I call this is a globalized act of intifada, and it is what the Palestinian supporters for the past 3 years in the Western societies, whether it was in Australia on their millions, in Sydney a few months ago, or in London in their millions over the past 2 years, or in America, they have been calling for globalization of intifada, which is an act of terrorism against the Jewish community and starting with an uprising of Islamic invasion of the West. And numerous attacks have followed this demand for the globalization of intifada, starting from the terrorist attacks in Washington against the embassy members of Israeli embassy members.
Of course, that young Israeli couple.
Yes, and then again on Yom Kippur we had here in Manchester an attack on the Jewish synagogue, and now we have again in another country of the Commonwealth and the J7, like we mentioned, a huge attack on a beautiful group of civilians celebrating a festival of light, a religious festival of lights. Now, Islamic attacks on religious festivals that are not Islamic are constantly taking place in countries that are not in places of conflict. And this is not only not being addressed, it is, even earlier today, I was watching different news outlets from Australia itself, and the commentators were not openly, actively confirming the fact that this was an attack on a Jewish community. While they mentioned that there was a Hanukkah celebration in the most prominent Jewish neighborhood in Sydney, Bondi Beach, but let's just pretend that this is just another act of a gun incident. This was a terrorism, an act of terrorism, globalized intifada, and in the past 40 years, Australian Jewish community have been under attack, targeted and systemic attack, which have been either facilitated or carried out by the Islamic Republic's allies and proxies.
We have had no confirmation that this was an Islamic terrorism attack. I mean, many people are obviously putting two and two together. We have now named the attacker, and that is Naveed Akram, 24, from Bonnyrigg in Sydney's south west. He is still alive and remains in custody. Lily, the one thing I keep coming back to here is the UK finds itself in a very similar situation to Australia, with let's think how we should put this, tiptoeing around the sensitivities of some communities, i.e. the Islamic community, whilst seemingly be willing to throw other communities, i.e. the Jewish community, under the proverbial bus. Why do you think that is?
Absolutely. Now, we will actually, I'm going to reiterate my point regarding the Islamic terrorism here. Let us not forget that most of the Islamic terrorist activities and attacks that have taken place in the past half a century have all been supported and facilitated and even taught through the camps of the communist Marxists, which is a godless group. So the very self-hating white person in the West is also allowing for and facilitating and is growing and is helping the radicalization of the white youth community in Europe too, whether it is in Britain or the ISIS French and European fighters that we witnessed over the past 10 years alone. So this is not just an Islamic attack, it's an Islamic leftist attack. Let us be correct about that.
Someone did remark earlier on today that the biggest terrorist actually in the West is the liberal left rather than the Islamic, because they are almost allowing this to happen under our own noses?
I wouldn't say they are almost allowing. I would say they want to hug terrorism out of a suicide bomber. Delusional.
It's frightening. The other thing I want to mention to you, Lily, I mean, just on the 12th of December, which was Friday, Miznon restaurant, there's one in London, in Notting Hill, they're Jewish-owned, and there's one, ironically, in Melbourne. Now, they both saw quite aggressive protests encouraged on them, where that phrase, globalise the intifada, and from the river to the sea, the chants we are so used to hearing on our streets at the moment that we almost now accept it. And yet the meanings of those two phrases...
Yes, I just want to say, in the same way that Palestine has no borders, this river and that sea are unknown to most people who are calling out for it. So we don't know whether they're calling from the River Thames to the English Channel to globalize the Intifada, or from the Jordan River to the Mediterranean Sea. I mean, figure it out, and please let us know how we can handle you, because this whole globalization of Intifada is taking lives of 8-year-old children on the beach in Australia today.
Lily Moo, thank you very much.
Before I may go, I have a question. Yeah, I have a big request. We, two groups in London right now, Stop the Hate and Our Fight UK, are holding a vigil in solidarity and unity with the Jewish community in the UK and in Australia at 5 p.m. today outside the Australian Commission to light Hanukkah lights and hold a vigil for the lost lives. Please show up, show solidarity and unity. If you do care about the UK, if you do care about your Jewish neighbours, show us some support. I am not Jewish myself, but I will wear my Star of David in support and solidarity of all of my Jewish and Israeli friends.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Lily Moo, and well said. And I can just testify that you are indeed wearing your Star of David today.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lily Moo. And as always with this programme and every programme on GB News, please do let us know what you are thinking. Certainly, if you want to talk, we're here for you. gbnews.com/your say, and we will read out any comments. And we're certainly here if you're worried or you're concerned. Particularly want to hear from you if you're Jewish and you're more worried, you're waking up more worried this morning than you were yesterday, and it's not been easy for the Jewish community recently, but this morning is, as I said, it's just one of those awful, awful things that you kind of knew was going to come. OK, joining me now is former Deputy Speaker of the Israeli Knesset, Moshe Feiglin. Moshe, thank you very much for joining me. Awful, awful news. I mean, condolences. It's just, I don't even know where to begin with this terror attack. How are you thinking, feeling? What are your thoughts on today?
Well, I'll tell you a private story. 3 months ago, I sent a letter to all the members of my family who live in Australia. I have a big family in Australia. Explaining them that basically we are facing the 1930s again. You know, after Hitler got into power at the beginning of the 30s in the previous century, and it's not going to get better. And I urged them to pick up belongings, sell their homes, whatever they can, and come to Israel, because the right is on the wall. And if they're not going to come on their feet, they're going to come on their knees. And unfortunately, what we've seen now is just the beginning. I don't think that there is a place for the Jewish people anymore on the entire world, but definitely on the Western world and definitely on Australia anymore. So I use your channel again to urge all the Jewish people to come to you have a home, you have a place, you have your land. Come to Israel, because what we're seeing now is just the beginning. I actually just wrote a book, Israel is Just the Beginning, talking exactly about that, and warning all the Jews, you should come to Israel, because what we're facing now is exactly the same history that led to the Holocaust 80 years ago.
Moshe, that's just heartbreaking to hear you say that. We are in 2025 now. The fact that we are comparing today to the horrors of 1930 Germany. Why do you think this is happening? And in particular, why is it happening so much in Australia? They have seen the largest spike in anti-Semitic attacks in any of the J7 countries.
Well, as far away from God your civilization is, your culture is, more anti-Semitic you are. This is how it happens. As more liberal, as more progressive you are looking to join forces with Islam. This is a fact. You seeing it now all over. More progressive, more leftist you are, more in favor you are of Hamas. And what Hamas did at the 7th of October, let me tell you, was worse than the Nazis. The Nazis tried to hide what they did. The Hamas were very proud of what we did. They were religiously proud of what they did. And the expectation from the whole world, from Israel, was to wipe them out immediately, to do with Gaza exactly what the British people did with Dresden and Hamburg when the Nazis started to lose the war. Exactly what the Americans did with every Japan city in Japan. And let me tell you more than that. No German soldier crossed the channel did in London what they did in Israel at the 7th of October. So once Israel did not act with a definite moral sense, meaning we have to wipe out this evil of evil, we open the gate for this evil to spread all over the world. And now this evil is picking up its face all over the world. And I already at the 7th of October, I tried to convince whoever I could here in Israel, if we're not going to act immediately and wipe out Gaza and make it part of the state of Israel, a wide anti-Semitism wave will rise all over the world. Okay. I knew it's coming because of the kind of reaction or lack of real reaction of Israel. And this is exactly what's happening now.
Moshe, obviously Australia and the UK both have more liberal Labour governments. I mean, how much do you think the attitude in both countries is enabling Islamic terrorism?
Well, as I said, these two ideologies, the progressive liberal ideology that took over almost the entire Western world, and Islam, have something in common. They both see the state of Israel, which represent the people of Israel, as their enemy. These are two ideologies that their main goal is to wipe out civilization that's based on the 10 Commandments, the civilization that's based on the basic belief in God and reality, civilization that says that there is an objective identity in the world. This was all given to humanity by the Jewish nation, and therefore the Jewish people, represented by the State of Israel, are the enemy of both ideologies.
Okay.
The progressive ideology and the Islam ideology. So what's happening today, Israel is actually what's blocking the first barricade for the entire for the survival of the entire humanity today.
Okay. Moshe, thank you very much for joining us, and as I said, thoughts and prayers with you, and certainly with any family members and friends you have in Australia. That's the Deputy Speaker of the Israeli Knesset there, Moshe Feiglin. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, very strong opinion there. As I said, you are more than welcome to get in touch and let me know what you think. gbnews.com/your say, and even if you just want to chat, we are here for you. Joining me now is writer and broadcaster Rabbi Jonathan Romain. Jonathan, good to talk to you again. An awful day to be talking about. What are your thoughts about what you've witnessed this morning?
Well, when I first heard the news, I sort of thought, oh, well, you know, bearing in mind the attack on the synagogue in Manchester in September, October, I thought, here we go again. But actually, this turned out to be much, much worse because, of course, there were, as you've been reporting, several deaths. And it's really just a reminder of what could have happened here in our own backyard in Manchester itself. And, of course, the killing is appalling in every possible sense. I mean, it was innocent people. They were civilians at a religious event, you know, a joyous communal event for families. And of course, the gunmen were long distance. You know, they had no idea who they were killing. It was totally indiscriminate murder just for its own sake. Obviously, they were targeting Jewish people. But, you know, they may well have included others who were just watching on or being supportive. And there's nothing good to say about this. And I suppose the really big worry, is not only was this an awful event, but will it become a copycat event? Because, you know, there is a giant candelabra, Hanukkah as we call it, in Trafalgar Square, other major centres up and down Britain, and there's always the fear that some other idiots, well, not actually idiots, this was pre-planned, it was premeditated. You have to say these were, I don't normally use these words, but evil, wicked people, you know, killing Jews because, you know, it's not as if they were attacking a military installation. They were just attacking ordinary civilians, and, you know, nothing good can come of it, and we just have to hold our heads in horror.
Yeah, I just want to read that we have the poster here that was advertising the event. It's Chanukah by the Sea, Bondi Beach Park, near the children's playground, live entertainment, activities, music, games and fun for all ages. This was a family event. The food available was hot chips, ice cream and more. And come and celebrate, bring your friends and family. Let's fill Bondi with joy and light. For something that sounded so joyous to end in such horror is absolutely unbelievable. But you don't sound surprised.
No, unfortunately not. Saddened, shocked, but not surprised, because, as I said, we have had this in our own country, in Manchester, the attack on the synagogue in Heaton Park, and also in other parts of the world. And I have to say, of course, there are madmen everywhere, because there's also another murder or massacre going on in the States, I believe, earlier today, which has been riven with all these sorts of attacks. I mean, one of the good things about Australia is that you may remember there was a massacre in Tasmania in 1996, and mass shooting, and as a result of that, they introduced some very tough gun laws, which means that actually guns have been in fairly short supply, and therefore these gunmen, the two or maybe the three, obviously, you know, again, premeditated, pre-planned. They obviously got had this in mind, chose the best position to kill people from afar, and got the guns and ammunition. So it's rare, but unfortunately, it was almost a culmination of what's happened over the last 2 years. And in terms of how we react here in this country, well, I think obviously, unfortunately, it's going to need immediate levels of extra police protection. at Jewish events or synagogues. And yet, on the other hand, I'm very, very adamant it should be a balanced response. In other words, we don't want to turn synagogues into fortresses. We don't want to surround ourselves with barbed wire. It would be sort of giving in to the gunman if we sort of isolated ourselves from the rest of society or limited our own activity. So, yes, be vigilant, be careful, have extra protection, but also keep our doors open. And it's a difficult balance, especially when you see the body bags on television, but it's one we've got to keep. Otherwise, we give them victory.
That's, well, very, very, very well said. Sadiq Khan, obviously the Mayor of London, has promised extra officers patrolling Jewish communities, his words, not mine, ahead of the Hanukkah celebration events coming up, as you mentioned, will be taking place in Trafalgar Square. How safe does that make you feel?
Well, I'm reassured, just as I was very pleased that the Australian Prime Minister immediately said, and I'm going to quote exactly, he said, an attack on Jewish Australians is an attack on all Australians, and it's an attack on our way of life, he said. I think that was a very powerful message. And I think, to be fair to Keir Starmer, he says similar sort of things. And if you think about it, attacking Jews is just such a nonsense. It's so illogical. It's, Jews are, and I'm astonished I'm telling you this because you know it already, but Jews are ordinary, normal people.
Of course.
And we've got televisions and mortgages, and we go to football clubs and pubs, and we're no threat to anybody. So why is there this extraordinary vitriolic hatred? It's beyond belief. It's no sense at all. And of course, it doesn't achieve anything other than fear and hatred. Maybe that's what the gunman wanted to do, and we must make sure that they don't succeed in that.
Yeah. And Jonathan, just finally, the one thing I wanted to ask you, whenever we have anything like this happen in this country, I mean, even going back to you mentioned football, the Maccabi Tel Aviv fans visiting Villa Park for the European game against Aston Villa. I mean, they were kept from going to the game, banned from going to the game for their own protection. Being Jewish shouldn't mean you're frightened to go or do anything. You should be allowed to go to a football match.
Yes, I agree. And by the way, the Maccabi Aston Villa issue is a very murky one, and I think the police are now backtracking. I'm a police chaplain, by the way, so I have a lot of sympathy for the police. But I think on this one, the West Midlands force may well have got it wrong, or some of the individuals may have got it wrong. And what was extraordinary is that the Maccabi fans didn't go. And yet they still had 700 police on duty, so and 11 arrests. So really, it was probably about the local population and elements within it being anti-Jewish. And instead of saying to them, as the police do to any other group, no, people have a right to protest, to demonstrate, to go to football matches, whatever, and we're going to protect them. We may sort of make sure they go and enter in a certain route and all the rest of it, but we're going to protect them. Instead, the police caved in. So that's a pretty unfortunate example, and hopefully one that won't be repeated again.
Well, I certainly hope that is the case, because it does seem to have chilling echoes of the past, where people of the Jewish faith, whether they support Israel or not, are being told to stay in one place, to shut up, to know your place. I mean, am I overthinking that? I just get the impression that, even thinking about a simple thing like a football match, if you're Jewish and you're Maccabi Tel Aviv, you can't go.
No, and that's right. And when it gets to this level, you really scratch your head and wondering what sort of society we're living in, not just for Jews, but for ordinary people. Is this group or that group going to be either banned or curtailed? I can tell you that I am going to my football club this Thursday evening, which is, to save you asking, the mighty Reading Football Club, but there we go. And I'm going to go as a proud supporter. I'm very determined that Jewish life, although, as I said, we have to be wary, we're going to continue full steam ahead. And of course, it's important, going back to the Bondi Beach, to remember, yes, there were 2, maybe 3 gunmen, but there are millions of Australians who are appalled. And I think we just need to remember this is a minority act, extraordinary minority act, and we've got to keep that in perspective. Otherwise, we give in to them, and we don't want to have a sort of a mental terror as well as a physical one.
No, as you say, Jonathan, terror works by terrorising people, and that's exactly so. I mean, I really admire your attitude, and let's hope most sensible people agree with your sentiments there. What do you think now the government in the UK needs to do to ensure that the rise in anti-Semitism, which we have seen, is dampened down?
I suppose it would be, as you would deal with any situation, try and cut it off at source. Give a message to the wider community, this is unacceptable. Also target hate groups. The problem is, of course, to be fair to the government, a lot of these are individuals or lone wolves, as seems to be the case in the Manchester synagogue attack. And it's actually a tough job. So, all credit to the police, all credit to the special services who try to sort of prevent these attacks. But it is hard work. And therefore, citizens can play their role, I won't say as amateur detectives, but if you've got suspicion about somebody, I don't know, saying some very, very, not just vicious, but violent things, maybe if you see them, doing some strange things or learning how to make bombs or goodness knows what, rather than thinking tut tut or oh dear, then you have to report it. We don't want to have a vigilante society, but we do want to be vigilant, and there is a very crucial difference between the two.
I mean, Jonathan, we have spoken before about the pro-Palestine marches that have been allowed to take place. Everyone has the right to protest, absolutely, of course. But when and I just use the example I wanted to mention to you as well, a restaurant, Miznon restaurant, you might be familiar with it, in London's Notting Hill. It also has a branch in Melbourne. It's owned by Jews. And there was a protest there on Friday night, the 12th of December, and outside both restaurants, ironically, as I said, one in Melbourne. And that was organised by pro-Palestine protesting groups. And they were verbally attacking Jewish customers simply having an evening meal with chance of globalise the Intifada and, as we all know, fly now from the river to the sea. Nothing was done about these protests, not here in the UK and not in Australia. Do you think the fact that the liberal left-wing governments that we have in both of our countries is almost enabling people to demonstrate, let's face it, with chants like that, rabid Jew hatred on the streets and get away with it?
Unfortunately, the criticism that there's two-tier policing does sometimes seem to be the case. And, would the police have allowed that outside a Muslim restaurant or a Sikh or a Hindu one? I suspect not. I mean, yes, you're quite right, legitimate protest, but that can be in the public square. It doesn't have to be outside a Jewish home, a Jewish business. And also, of course, at root of it is the assumption that all Jews support Israel. Well, we may well do support the people of Israel or the existence of the state, but not necessarily the government of the day or the political policy of the day. I'm a patriot. I support this country. I don't necessarily support Kemi Badenoch or Keir Starmer. You don't make that assumption about me. We shouldn't make that assumption about Jews being necessarily in favour either way. So that, I think, does cross the border between anti-Israel and anti-Semitism. When you target Jews on the assumption they're responsible for what's happening in Gaza, that's anti-Semitism. There's no doubt about it. Nothing. By all means, if you want to demonstrate outside the Israeli embassy, okay, there's a political cause. Whether I agree with it or not doesn't really matter. But outside a Jewish restaurant, what on earth has that got to do with Gaza? And by the way, how on earth does it help a single Palestinian? If you want to help them, donate money to a Palestinian Red Crescent or whatever, but don't target a Jewish restaurant and go home and feel good about it.
Do you think Keir Starmer and Sadiq Khan in London, where, as you say, there's going to be Hanukkah celebrations taking place over the next few days, do you think they should do more immediately? Should they maybe take tougher stance against people who are targeting Jewish homes and synagogues and restaurants? I mean, when I walked into work today, I saw two people at the station with, I don't know where they were going or what they were doing, but they had Palestinian flags. And I mean, I'm not Jewish, but I thought that just feels completely and utterly wrong today.
I think they do need to do something just to give a message that anti-Semitism, attacking Jews because they are Jews, is unacceptable. I don't want to have a police state, but I think they need to sort of just raise the profile. They have, to give the government credit, they have done a lot, both openly and behind the scenes. But I think there has to be a message. Bondi is unacceptable. They did that at Manchester. Unfortunately, they've got to do it again. That's the awful thing about it. That what we thought was a one-off at Manchester is happening again. We don't want it to be talking, you and I, this time next week about yet another attack.
No, please God, whatever God you happen to worship, we don't do that. Just finally, Jonathan, do you think the situation, not just in Australia, but in the UK, and we have seen other attacks in Germany, we've seen them in France, we have seen Islamic attacks on not just Jewish people, but on ordinary young people going to concerts, for example. Do you think the situation, do you hope the situation is going to get better before it gets worse, or do you suspect, as many of us do after this morning, that things might get worse before they get better?
Well, like everybody, I just hang my head and think, what kind of society are we? I mean, there's always been violence, but not this mindless violence, and not this targeted violence. Yes, I hope it gets better, but it does depend not just on the police, but on ordinary people. And when you hear people, in the pub or on social media saying things that are actually possibly going to lead to violence, it's one thing sounding off about this or that, but leading to violence, then I think you have a duty to draw it to the attention of other people, to the police, because violence words lead to violent actions. We know that, and the people of Bondi know that only too well today.
Absolutely, a very hard lesson learned for everybody. Jonathan, always a joy to talk to you. That's writer and broadcaster Rabbi Jonathan Romain, and enjoy the match and may the best team win. I'm a West Ham fan, so I'm not going down that road. Thank you very much, Jonathan. Good to talk to you. OK, well, I'm Dawn Neeson, and this is GB News, and you are joining us on a very tough day. The Bondi beach attack has now been confirmed as 12 dead, 29 injured. The dead include a child and a police officer. So joining me now is our Home and Security editor, Mark White, to bring us up to date on developments in Australia. Mark.
Well, we can confirm, obviously, the number of dead as 11 innocent members of the public, and of course one of the attackers, taking the death toll to 12, but 29 in hospital, including 2 police officers. All are described as being in a serious condition. And we can confirm as well now the name of one of the suspected attackers. That individual is 24-year-old Naveed Akram. He is described as of Pakistani origin, from Lahore in Pakistan. This is him on the bridge, that small bridge overlooking the area where people were gathering for this Hanukkah celebration. His driver's license was found beside him as well. That has been used to help identify him. We are not sure at this stage whether he is the individual that authorities say is known to them. You can see from the driver's license there, that's clearly the man on the bridge, 24-year-old Naveed Akram. But we have heard from the head of Australia's spy agency that one of the alleged attackers was known to the security services. Now, they've said not in the sense of posing an immediate threat, or at least that's the early indications they have, but clearly known to the security services on some kind of a terrorist or extremist database. And it will obviously remain to be seen in the sort of hours and days ahead just how significant that information is, and whether actually there was anything more the authorities could have done to get a handle on this threat, whether there was intelligence that may not have been acted on in the way it should have. That often is the case, sadly, with terrorist threats. We've seen in this country before multiple terrorist attacks that have taken place, from 7/7 to London Bridge, to Manchester Arena, with information on extremists, known extremists, that the police and intelligence services in some cases had not joined the dots and put the intelligence picture clearly together, showing the threat. We can tell you, though, that sources have told us that the Israeli intelligence agency Mossad has warned Australia, has warned authorities in Australia on multiple occasions recently about a growing threat targeting the Jewish community in Australia, and a threat that, according to sources, Mossad had said was linked to the Iranians, that it was either being backed by or encouraged by the Iranian regime. Those warnings and intelligence apparently passed on to Australian authorities. So, as I say, we're in very early stages after this incident, only a few hours later. So we are, of course, in the phase at the moment of dealing with the specific incident, of now, of course, the detectives and forensic teams getting in there to piece together the minute-by-minute account of what actually happened. But in tandem with that is the investigation now into the two attackers in custody. There may be a third, according to the police, but that is just an avenue they're exploring out of an abundance of caution. They're not saying that they have a key suspect in mind, but there were some eyewitness reports suggesting a possibility of a third attacker, so the police are looking into that. But in tandem, as I say, with the ongoing on-the-ground piecing together of what happened is the investigation around the two attackers, what was known about them, the intelligence picture in Australia. Were there any potential warnings and clues that may have been missed on?
And indeed, I mean, just in case people are still just joining us, Mark, I mean, we know that this happened around 6:40 p.m. local time. Two gunmen involved, as you said, Mark, 12 dead, 29 injured, a child and a police officer among the dead, sadly. One suspect, as you pointed out there, Naveed Akram, 24, from Bonnyrigg in Sydney, but of Pakistan descent. Mark, obviously night has now fallen in Australia. Do we know any more about a suspected third attacker? We understand that Naveed Akram's house has been searched. Do we have any more information on a potential third attacker?
No information beyond the fact that there were some initial reports that what often happens in these fast-moving, marauding attacks, be they knife attacks, gun attacks, vehicle-borne attacks, is people get panicked and confused, understandably, with all the chaos. They might see, for instance, someone rushing to help and, mistake that in their mind's eye as potentially a suspect. So all of that gets reported in, disseminated by the police, and they have to check everything out. I'm not convinced, to be honest, that they're taking the threat of a third person particularly seriously, but out of an abundance of caution, they are looking into those potential reports. But at this hour, as you say, approaching 1 in the morning in Sydney, the slow time gathering of evidence is now underway as the injured are in hospital being treated. 29 of those, all described as being in serious condition.
Awful. Thank you very much for now. That's Home Secretary Editor Mark White. Thank you very much for bringing us up to date on the live breaking story. OK, now let's talk to Telegraph columnist Jake Wallace-Simmons. Jake, thank you very much for joining me. Awful day. What do you make of the events of today?
Well, it feels to me, sadly, as if there was a grim inevitability about these attacks. For many years, the Australian Jewish community has been warning the government about rising anti-Semitism against them, particularly, of course, since October the 7th. There was a firebombing of a Melbourne synagogue about a year ago or so. And even this week, a local rabbi reported that he and his children had been targeted by a woman on a train who was shouting at them, "Get to the gas chambers." This sort of stuff has become almost part of life for Australia's Jewish community, which has felt very besieged and very beleaguered and not really supported by the government. Let's not forget the Anthony Albanese government has recognised a Palestinian state, as has our own here in Britain as well, which has been perceived by many people as support for Hamas. So that's how Jews in Australia have been feeling. And this latest attack is just the horrendous culmination of that rise in anti-Semitism and in anti-Semitic propaganda all over the world, not least in Britain as well. Jews, I think, all around the world have been sensing that something like this was on the cards, was inevitable, because the propaganda has been of staggering proportions. Jews and Israelis being associated with being baby killers, with being murderers, with being warmongers, and so on and so forth. There's only so much of that stuff that can enter the bloodstream of society before people begin to act. And the Manchester killer, of course, in the Manchester synagogue attack, shouted out something on the lines of, "This is revenge for you killing children." So this propaganda gets under people's skin, and a few people do act out in this way. So really, it's a day of mourning, of course, and of shock, but certainly there's a sense of inevitability surrounding it as well.
Jake, why do you think the governments, both in Australia and here, which are a similar political slant, allow people to target restaurants and synagogues and Jewish homes with chants of, globalise the Intifada and from the river to the sea, which we're also used to hearing now? We're almost tone deaf to what it actually means. Why does our government allow this to happen?
That's a very good question. I mean, globalise the Intifada is a bloodthirsty chant. The Intifada, the second Intifada, involved 140 suicide bombs on Israeli streets, blowing up largely children on their way to school for a lot of the time. If that's what we want to globalise here in Britain, then that's a really depraved position, and it's one that should be taken more seriously. But the problem is that our affinity for free speech and for the pillars of an open society is being exploited by the very people who wish to undo that open society and replace it with something far more authoritarian, Sharia or Islamic law, and their radical progressive allies. So they're sort of manipulating our values of free speech against us. But let's not forget that there's been some stories of great heroism today in Australia, which sort of counterbalances all that depravity. Three in particular. There was my friend Arsen Ostrovsky, who was shot in the head but survived a glancing blow to the head, who gave an interview directly afterwards, covered in blood, to television, where he said, "We've lived through worse, we're going to live through this, and we're going to get the people who did this." There was a woman called Jess, only named as Jess so far, who protected a 3-year-old girl who she didn't know with her body and took a bullet to save her life. And of course, there was that iconic hero named as Ahmed Al-Ahmed, 43 years old, who disarmed one of the attackers with his bare hands. That video has gone viral, and he, of course, was a Muslim. So there are a lot of notes of hope in amongst all this devastation, but you're totally right to point out that the